We're going to call to order the City of South Pasadena Mobility and Transportation Infrastructure Commission regular meeting for Tuesday, October 15th, 2024. I will ask for a roll call, please.
Commissioner Fisher,
Here.
Commissioner Dunlap,
Here.
Commissioner Abelson,
Here.
and Commissioner Hammond was excused. Chair Hughes,
Here.
we have a quorum.
All right, next we do the Pledge of Allegiance. If I may ask Commissioner Abelson to lead us in the pledge.
Please rise if you're able. Begin.
Our next item will be public comment, and since we have only one key item on our agenda, we'll take comments regarding general public comment, and if you want to comment on our presentation from Tool, or you could wait and we can take additional comments after the presentation. Philip, would you like to lead us in public comment as to who would like to speak?
Yeah, I'd also like to acknowledge there's a virtual public comments as well.
Chair, is this general public comment first?
We can do general first, but if someone wants to make it because of timing,
Okay.
that they know they want to share regarding tonight's presentation, if you read it online or want to make a comment, we can take that too. And if you want to wait till after the whole presentation and make comments, we can do it again then.
Okay, first we have Kay Meridian.
Thank you. Requested to, yeah, thank you. Which one? Green one? Oh, yeah, that's on, okay. Kay Meridian from Marengo Matters. Barbara, our leader and general, was unable to make it this evening and asked me to just stop by to remind everybody that Marengo really does matter. And I personally have a fear that Marengo is going to eventually be forgotten in the arena of all these traffic problems. And I just want to remind you that we've already had one of our neighbors killed, and to remind you that we had 345 speeding tickets on just our 2 blocks within a few months. So I just want you to be aware that we are under siege. And just driving out of my driving back out of my driveway is a bit of a problem because there's so much traffic. And I'm not sure if you are aware that as I'm backing out of my driveway and I get hit by a car, whose fault do you think it is? It's not the car that hit me. It's the person who's driving out of the driveway. And so I want you to realize that we are all on that block vulnerable. And I'm just pleading to you, do not forget us. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Kay.
Next we have Joanne. I would also note that a few of these are for agenda item 2, so you can comment now or comment later. The next person is Joanne. Knuckles.
Hello, I'm here to speak on the item number 2, the tool design report. I'm so glad to see after a year, and so excited that something's going to be happening and we have the money to do the work, because the first time Ian Lockwood did a design, I think was in 2003 or 4, Rick, for Fremont, but nothing ever happened because we didn't have the money. Now we have the money, got a much better design, got a lot of problems in town that need to be taken care of. So I would like to urge you to move forward as quickly as possible. And I think the best way is to set up some ad hoc committees that include members of MTech, Public Works Commission, and even the NREC, as there are issues of trees, green space, and the tool proposal. You can say that citizen members can also be included, such as Friends of Fletcher, Marengo Matters, Meridian Group, etc. You can say that there is an excellent example of this type of ad hoc group working well as the Water Council was set up a number of years ago and included over a dozen active members. So seeing Dr. Schneider here, I'm remembering about 1999 or 2000 when we were on the DAG, when all this sort of started with Bob Joe, John Vandercook, Michael Birch, Harry Knapp, other council people like Michael Cacciotti, et cetera. So I don't know how many years we went through all this stuff. Had a problem with Fair Oaks, which ended up being a fiasco, and the Public Works Commission set up. So there's a lot of history. We know a lot of why there were problems, and we can help you understand what the problems were so they can be avoided again and things can move smoothly. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne.
Next, we have Nick Howell.
I just wanted to express support for the tool design report and had the opportunity to review it front to back. Really appreciate the philosophy of reducing traffic and slowing down the speeds on our streets in South Pasadena. We also appreciated, as you may recall, our house was the house that had the fatal accident on Orange Grove a little over a year ago. We appreciated the tool report putting some consideration around Marengo and Meridian and Orange Grove in their thinking. We do believe that we need a comprehensive plan for the city of South Pasadena, and I really thought that the plan represented a lovely way to revitalize South Pasadena, and thinking on the sort of long arc of how this city fought off the 710 freeway, but we're left with what we have right now, which is still has a scar tissue of being a cut through town and too much traffic. And the tool report or the type of design with whatever refinements are made in the subsequent phases, to me, represents the sort of final chapter in completing the resistance to the 710 freeway and returning South Pasadena to the character that we deserve for this wonderful little town. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Chris Miller.
Good evening, Commission, Mayor. I'm here to give some comments in support of the Tool Design Group plan on behalf of South Pass Active. We took the time to review the report as well as taking part in the original charrettes. We're really excited that it has finally come out. I think I just want to highlight a few points here. One of the really important insights from the report, and a thing that I think we all need to understand, is that traffic demand is not fixed quantity, that is elastic. Which is to say that right now, as mentioned before, we are really a cut-through town. And by implementing measures at various points throughout the city, I think we can really address that overall volume of traffic that is coming into and going directly out of the city, and instead favor options that give our residents and outside visitors the options for moving around the city without a car and without all the impacts in terms of noise and in terms of traffic violence that brings with it. So in terms of next steps, we're very excited about what's laid out in the report, but I specifically want to call out, I think we should take this as an opportunity to pause any projects that are intended to increase car capacity, even though in the micro they may seem useful. I think they're really contributing to the overall increasing more traffic into our city. I would also like to see costed designs come out for the changes mentioned in the report, and look at short-term measures that can be implemented in the meantime. As other commenters have mentioned, I think the money is there for the taking. We do need to invest a lot of time and effort into securing that funding. But I think it is something that we can do, and I'm very excited to see this move forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
And next we have Caroline Howell.
Hello. I'll be quick since my husband stole most of my talking points. But at 300 Orange Grove, I just wanted to say I'm so excited. We're all excited to see this coming to a little bit more of the planning phase, since there was so much energy in the city from so many stakeholders in the last year as we all attended these meetings and listened to this. It could be a real vision for our city. We want to prioritize residents, taxpayers, walkers, and not just the cut-through commuters. And I feel like, as everyone has said, this is a cut-through town. I'm glad to see you taking the holistic approach with this plan, but we do need to think about how this is going to support our town. And I know MTech is about traffic and safety, but we need to remember that there's a big economic boost to our town too, and to taxpayer money. You know, there's some articles we highlighted in a submission about Lancaster, California, and the spending they did there, and the tenfold return on income to the city when you make your town a place that people want to come and walk and shop. So it's pro-business too, and pro-safety, and pro-community members. So thank you for taking this to the next level.
Thank you.
And next we have Rick Schneider.
Well, good evening, everybody. Good evening, Mayor Znaimer and council members. My name is Rick Schneider. I live on Buena Vista Street, and I want to assure you, make you understand that I'm here as your friend. And I was on this commission a long time ago, and I know it's a difficult commission to work with, all the problems. So I do want to support your consideration of this tool report, the design report. It has a lot of good, interesting ideas in it, and it is very well intentioned. You know, I mean, we may have to adjust some of the suggestions here and there, but the idea of what it wants to do is something that the community and I support very strongly. So I want you to be adopted, you know, earnestly, you know, strongly supported. And when it goes to council, I hope you'll be very aggressive in pushing it to the council and not let them just set it aside. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, former mayor.
And next we have Jessica Law.
I am a resident. I live on Monterey near Orange Grove. That intersection got a traffic light 2020 in spring of 2020. It is incrementally better, but I do want to support the tool report, and also
I'm sorry, did you say Monterey and Orange Grove?
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure. Thank you.
It's not a solved problem. The sidewalk all along Monterey on both sides still has, it's a narrow sidewalk, and it has utility poles here and there. On pretty much every block, it has a few, so it's not possible to get like a wheelchair through it. I can barely get myself and a small child through it. And my car got totaled while parked in front of my house. And anecdotally, I've heard of this happening several families along the few blocks around my house, and also around the corner east of the kink. So just supporting more effective and more drastic traffic calming measures along Monterey, in addition to the whole city. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we have a public comment online, raised hand.
Please.
Okay, Beth Levinson, you should be able to speak now.
Yes, thank you so much. I really appreciate you all giving us this opportunity to express our support for the implementation of this plan and the work that's being done. I want to reiterate everything that the speakers have said so far who are there in person tonight. I believe so strongly in making our little town safe for pedestrians, safe for children walking to school. Me pushing my grandson in a stroller right now, it's pretty terrifying to walk down Meridian. I live on Meridian and Oliver, and just crossing over Meridian is terrifying because people are flying through. There's really no signage, there's no stop signs. The one stop sign that we have at Buena Vista and Meridian is really hard to see. There's a pit, and the signage is kind of covered, so people come to a screeching halt sometimes while I'm in the intersection. So I just really want to ask you to support investing in us. We invested in this community 2 years ago when we bought the house on Oliver. And I'm happy to do anything I can as a resident to support you in this work. So just wanted to ask you to please support this plan, the implementation of this plan. That's it.
Thank you.
There are no more public comments at this moment.
Thank you, Philip. Next, we'll move on to a formal presentation of the recommendation and proposed plan from Tool. Good evening, Mr. Gerber.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll be doing the presentation tonight. We do not have a representative from Tool, and I'll explain, what our objective here is with the presentation. I also want to clarify that we don't have a project status update tonight. Number one, we've got a lengthy item ahead of us that we want to focus on. Number two, I've mentioned this before. Time's up. I mentioned this before but we're pretty low on staff resources, and it takes quite a bit to put that report together. So we'll probably try to resume that next month. Okay, so let's jump into the presentation here. We are reviewing the tool design memo tonight. And there's a lot of aspects to that memo if you've had a chance to review it. But the key item that we want to focus on is moving forward with one specific project. It's technically a group of projects, and that's the Fremont and Huntington project. And I'll explain why it's actually a group of projects in a moment here. The tool design memo was pretty comprehensive in terms of its citywide planning evaluation. Other streets were discussed. We heard a little bit about that in the public comment tonight. We do have other project opportunities to apply the results of those evaluations to other projects. But the reason it's important to focus on Fremont Huntington tonight is because we need to reach this important milestone to move from the planning phase into the design phase so we can move on with the project. And we actually have not yet started spending the funding of the project because the funding starts with the design phase. So that's where we want to focus on tonight. So let's jump to first slide. Okay. So let me guide you through how the project phases will work. So we've been in and we continue to be in the funding stage for some time, which is basically collecting all the funding, executing the funding agreements, evaluating what is eligible, what's not eligible, and basically holding on to the funding. Some of it was awarded quite some time ago. We have 16.6 million total across all the sources. We'll talk about that in a moment. There's an opportunity to maybe up that quite a bit. So where we are right now is to review the ideas that need to be incorporated into prioritization for this project. And what do I mean by that? So the tool design process, we did this a little bit differently than we might do other capital improvement projects. As you saw last month, when we were talking about the Fair Oaks ITS project, we came to you probably the first time in about, a good 8 months or so to show you 30% designed construction plans for that project to get your feedback on moving to the next design phase. The reason we didn't take that approach with this project is because the project needs and what should be prioritized to actually be built is very vague in the funding agreements. We wanted to go through a community design process first to basically identify all the needs in all the areas so that we can narrow it down in the design process, if that makes sense. So what we're looking at tonight is going through the tool design memo, looking at all the ideas they have, and we have some staff feedback, and we want your feedback as well, including the public's feedback. So that we can actually move on to the next step, which is hiring a designer, and that designer will have multiple disciplines underneath them, what we're asking them to do. So tonight really is about gathering these ideas, getting your feedback so that we can hire a designer, and that designer will further prioritize what goes into this project design based on costs, their cost evaluation, which is a very difficult thing to do. Help us get through the environmental phase, which in most cases, this project's likely categorically exempt. However, there are some steps to go through in order to see that through. It might not be. And then with the design consultant, along with a community planning consultant, guide the community through the rest of the design process. So in other words, fortunately or unfortunately, this is not going to work in such a way where what you see up here tonight is what we're going to build and we're done. In order for this to really work effectively, this is the very early conceptual design look at what's possible. We need to basically run this through some filters to see what we can afford, what might need to be deferred to a later time, and what the community is going to accept as the end result. And that goes through our normal 30, 60, 90 design process, which is once the consultant receives all this information, they know what their job is, they'll produce, like we did last month with the Fair Oaks project, a 30% design package amongst meeting with the community to make sure they're on the right track. Then we talk about it, we go through that iteration, we review it, change it. There's alternatives that are incorporated with that. There may be several different options for different locations of the project. We select the one that's most appropriate, and then we move on to the next phase. And so how we do that with the community is really going to be a discussion with the community, the commission, and the council. I heard a comment about creating a committee. These are all great ideas, but the idea here is that this is not the final look at this, and this is not an approval of the design memo. This is the beginning of the iterative design process to say, this is what we're going to hand the designer to start working on, and they're going to create actual construction design drawings of something that we can build, and that we want your input on what that may or may not include. Does that make sense? Hopefully, just some nods of the head, a little bit. Comment?
Jared,
Yes.
yeah. So just a question on the timing. So
Yeah.
you talked about drawings. Absolutely. So what we're doing now is looking at a broad concept.
Yeah,
right?
so
And
as I'll explain in the next couple of slides, the funding agreement is here. It's like everything that you could imagine with some restrictions. And I want to make sure you understand the restrictions because there's some things we can do and there's some things we can't do. We need to narrow that down, and we wanted to do that with community input. Another project traditional approach would be like, okay, here's our funding, let's hire a designer. Hey, everybody, here's your 30% design, what do you think? We thought that would be way too far. That would be so far down a hole of expenditure of planning something out without talking to the community. We didn't take that approach. That's why we brought tool design in, get everybody energized about the project, give us their ideas, so that we could prioritize what we can accomplish with this $16+ million and turn that into the 30% design plans and the environmental study that has to happen associated with it.
so the question they ask,
Go ahead.
When you talked about drawings, the thought went through my mind that it'd be great for this designer to for us to have some conversation with you and or the designer about what the projects might actually be before they start designing and drawing. That makes sense?
Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up. So, so in talking about the project phases, right now we're trying to review these ideas to incorporate into the prioritization. We hand all these ideas to a designer that we go through a selective process, a limited selective process to save time and money to select a designer. Basically, we've already pre-qualified at least a dozen designers through our on-call process, including, Tool Design that helped us with this, among other consultants that you've seen do work for the city. So what we have right now is it's just basically an RFP, request for proposals, that incorporates everything that you're seeing tonight. We want to refine that before releasing it with your comments. Once we release that, we get in a number of proposals, and we're talking, large dollar value here because this is a large multi-million-dollar design process. Before we finalize a contract with that designer and award that design to the council, the idea would be to discuss that with the commission, what they're focusing on, what their scope is, make sure there's adequate community input, adequate alternative development for ideas that we just necessarily can't just agree on, right? There's like a couple different scenarios we need to evaluate. And then the council awards that design, and then we basically get started with them putting pen to paper and scheduling community an iteration through the community for those design.
Well, Ted, can I back up for 1 second for a contextual kind of concept? So we've put out this report by Tool, which is an encompassing view of the city in a vision, as was mentioned, a philosophy, et cetera. We know that we're looking at roughly $80 million with various sources of funding. I'm talking conceptually overall, with outside funding and et cetera. And that as people looked at this and looked at the 80 million, they're seeing the whole city in its whole. And we've heard mention of Meridian, we've talked about Marengo, there's Mission, there's Fair Oaks, et cetera. But what you're presenting right now is you're zeroing in on the arteries of, arterials of Fremont and Huntington Drive. And then I'm assuming you're going to give us the full scope. Are we talking the full extent of the streets, of both of those streets, and then taking the elements? But what you're saying is out of our 80 million, we're earmarking 16.6 for these two main streets, to use that, arterials.
Everything except for that last part. The 16 million is a little complicated. I'll break it down for you in a moment. Only 10 of it is from the 80. The other 6.6 comes from other sources. But to your point, everything is accurate. Yes. And we are looking at the entirety of Fremont Avenue and the entirety of Huntington Drive from Alhambra on both to Columbia on Fremont and to Garfield Atlantic on Huntington Drive. So that's the full scope of the project. Yeah.
Chair, may I ask
a
question that might clarify the purpose? And if it doesn't clarify the purpose, sorry for wasting everyone's time.
Sure.
Are your pre-funding agreement, right?
No, we have funding agreements in place that we've been modifying and holding on to and changing the dates. And whenever opportunities come up to tweak them or increase them, that we've basically been in this pattern of continual work.
Okay, because I know typically with a funding agreement with Metro, you provide them a project scope and a schedule before they'll enter into.
And that happened before I even worked at the city, long time ago. A lot has changed with these funding sources. Even the staffing who administer the funding sources have changed. The funding sources themselves are somewhat vague, and we'll talk about it in a moment, that we actually have that opportunity to, I don't want to say somewhat vague in terms of we know what we have to do with them and there's things that are in and things that are out. But when we get down to this design level detail, there's things that we can change.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. So as I mentioned, right now we're talking about prioritization. We need fairly accurate cost estimations, and this is the case with any planning assessment, to understand what can stay in and what has to come out. clearly you're going to see some designs in this process that are just going to exceed the budget that we have right now. But the idea is that, as Chair Hughes had mentioned, there's future phases of projects at other streets at later times. There's other opportunities. We really need to get this project underway, heading towards construction. And so we have to make those decisions about what to leave in and what to leave out. We have the environmental process, which is required. And then I mentioned this community design process. So the output of this project will be plans, specifications, and estimates, basically a construction bid package that we put out to bid through our public works contracts process and hire the lowest bidder constructor to build the projects. Any questions on where we are in that process?
Chair, I have a quick question.
Please, I'm sorry.
How are you selecting the designer?
So we will, everything you see tonight, including the tool design memo, some other information that we've kind of gathered over time, including the funding agreements, will be put into a request for proposals that's in draft form right now. We will release that in a limited capacity to designers, civil and traffic designers that we already have approved by council on an on-call basis. And so we know that these designers, have already worked with the city. Staff understand the way they work. They're familiar with the city. They have already, reviewed the terms and conditions of working with the city contractually. And then we will discuss that with you, the outcome of that process, and based on your recommendation and council's approval, award that design contractor to one of those firms.
Terrific. Thank you.
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Fisher.
Ted, is the role of this commission only to comment or prioritize on the tool recommendations, or does this commission have some opportunity somewhere in the process to suggest improvements for further consideration in the corridor?
The answer is both, absolutely. If anything, the idea behind this whole process is to gather all ideas and narrow them down to the ideas that are feasible, constructible, and that will actually provide the community benefit that the community is looking for. So if that means, we want to talk about what does work and doesn't work here, or if there's another idea to add in, the designer's responsibility will be we have to give them this broad direction so they can utilize their expertise to narrow down what's feasible and what can be constructed within the budget and design that on our behalf.
To Commissioner Fisher's point, when you're presenting the data in the tool report, there are recommendations about surfaces and various opportunities for different surfaces to slow traffic, distinction, narrowing, etc. When you go out to bid, will you have a breadth of opportunity, or are we going to need to narrow it down based on costs? Or are we looking at alternatives when they go in design and we're looking at, because the specs, if you will? So
the way that we'll do this is we'll essentially do it on a street segmented basis. So particular intersections will be split up. Obviously, they have to work together. But the idea is that the designer goes to work and comes up with either what we all can have a consensus on what the street should look like in a particular intersection. There's some intersections that are pretty straightforward. And then there's a couple others that might need a few alternatives. So at an early level in the design process, the consultant can give us, alternatives A, B, and C and say, these are the various costs for these. These are the impacts you're going to have environmentally. And which one do we want to move forward with? So the idea here is that, we don't want to hand a designer just a blank sheet of paper and say, hey, can you design Fremont Huntington for us? We want to take all of the input that we've gathered from the community, it's priceless basically, and give the designer very specific direction to say, we want you to go to Fremont and Columbia, and these are our objectives, these are our ideas, show us what you can do and how much it's going to cost. and then we can evaluate that together. Because at the end of the day, we have to build these things. The ideas can only take us so far, but we need to give the designer guardrails to keep them in line with what we want to accomplish.
Thank you.
Of course. Okay, so just a quick on the funding, just so we can all be on the same page. It's been some time since we talked about this. So there's 3 funding sources involved in this project right now. There's the Measure R Mobility Improvement Projects funding. So this is the $80 million that came out of the 710 discontinuance. And we have taken $10 million of that 80 million. I mean, we as in the city had done this some time ago, and is applying it to both Fremont and Huntington. Now, it says in the funding agreement that the expenditure of that funding is supposed to have a nexus to highway operation. Now, Metro has since clarified that, and they've opened up the ability to use that for, it doesn't just have to be for vehicles. It can be all sorts of different modes of transportation. However, you do have to do some homework to demonstrate how you are going to facilitate safe and efficient transportation flow through your city. So, with the 710 ending out of the EIR process, where a particular alternative was selected, the TDM-TSM alternative, that said, you don't need to build a 710. You can accomplish what you would accomplish with transportation opportunities with a bunch of other projects. This is that money, and this has to be attributed to that original transportation goal of, in theory, the 710. This is incredibly nuanced, okay? All I want to say is that this is probably the most restrictive funding source that we have associated with the project, and so it's onerous on us to be selective of which project elements we apply to this funding so that the funding will remain eligible. We have flexibility in the other funding sources, and that's why we need to balance the elements that we're building and be very specific with which funding source we're using for which piece of the project. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay. And as I mentioned, there's some things on here. So our funding agreement is targeting local street intersection improvements, which is pretty obvious. That's what we're trying to do. Traffic signal and system upgrades, and ITS. So as we're doing signal pole replacements and upgrades, detection system upgrades, if there's any sort of technology that we're incorporating into the corridor, Fremont and Huntington, this is probably this is the funding source we should use, because that's basically kind of a slam dunk as far as pedestrian, cycling, and vehicle operations is putting those types of upgrades here. And then there's basically some other language here that says what we're trying to accomplish with this funding. Questions on that? Okay.
I'm sorry,
Oh,
is that for Fair Oaks Avenue only?
No, this particular funding, is a good question, is for Fremont Avenue, Huntington Drive, and this one funding set can be applied to the Fair Oaks and Huntington intersection. But nothing else is applicable to Fair Oaks at this time for this funding source.
So it can include the full length of Fremont?
Yes, full length of Fremont, full length of Huntington, and the Fair Oaks Huntington intersection is included in this funding source.
Thank you.
The next funding source is, okay, one thing I think I should add about this previous funding source is that it's a $10 million allocation, but at the moment, we've only have a funding agreement for 1.1 million out of this for environmental and design work. So we could certainly grow that, and then the $10 million isn't static either. There's more where that came from, but there's other projects we want to do in the city, so we have to be mindful of that. But at the moment, we have 1.1 that we can actively use for design and environmental work. The next funding source is the Measure M Metro Active Transportation funding source. This came out of Cycle 1 of the MAP program. And this is a bit less specific in terms of what we could spend on. This is defined for active transportation purposes, which is a whole gamut of things that we can use. Specifically, the funding agreement lists these things under Huntington Drive and Fremont Avenue. So what you see is, of course, bike facilities, curb ramp improvements, crosswalks, flashing beacons, refuge, advanced warning, signal technology to assist pedestrians and cyclists, and then some transit fixtures like bus benches, trash receptacles, and bus shelters. So this is what's defined in the funding agreement as what the city would accomplish. And then just to sort of cap off these two, both funding agreements contain these maps. And what I'll share with you, I know it's so small to see, but what's on these maps is a bunch of Rs, which mean ramp improvements, like curb ramp improvements. And then there's some buses and these little purple guys, which are like benches. So there is some prioritization of bus/transit improvements that should be included in the project.
Ted, on that note, as we were reading in the tool report, there was mention of Metro's advanced bus plans coming.
Yes.
Do we know any details about that and how that could be impacted and incorporated, such as, I know there were suggestions about moving certain bus stops for advantageous purposes, and if we knew more about what Metro was doing regarding that, was there something that we know that could impact, or do we need to reach out and get more information regarding their plans?
So we are very involved in Metro's next gen plan. We meet with their consultant. We have our own consultant we're trying to bring on board to help us with that project. We are behind because of our staffing problem. But really what that is us Metro being able to utilize our equipment and install some of their own equipment to prioritize buses. We do have the opportunity to move stops if we need to. That's really just about the performance of an intersection and the convenience and safety for transit users and also other drivers and cyclists. But really what that is focusing on more of the ITS improvements to enhance the way the bus network works in the city. So yeah, that is a part of this. That will be that entire next gen agreement and objectives will be part of the designer's RFP package.
So we'll get information to be able to put that to the designers so that those things could be implemented or conceived, should we get more details?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, to emphasize this, there's also, you could see some traffic signals on here. Well, maybe you can't see them, but I can see them here or there. And that's basically showing that in some locations there's existing signals, but for the most part, there's upgraded signals at the signalized intersections. Maybe a couple exceptions, but that's where, the measure R, a signal improvement money, is likely to be spent. Okay, and then final funding source is the Highway Safety Improvement Program. Now, we don't talk about this too much. It's on our monthly status report, kind of in a holding pattern. And the reason it's in a holding pattern is we applied for this, I want to say late 2021 or early 2022 under cycle 11 of the HSIP program. I think it was cycle 11. And this is where we got another $500,000 towards very specific improvements along Fremont and Huntington. And you can see the amounts here. The percentages is what the match is for the city. So in most cases, the state is providing 90% of the cost of the project. And in one case, they're only providing half. But these are little pieces that we can incorporate into this design. But again, we have to make sure that the funding for these parts of the construction go towards this funding source because it's very specific as to what we got awarded. But here you can see Monterey and Fremont, Fremont, Huntington. These are all intersections. Fremont, Columbia, and Monterey, and then Huntington Drive between Lamont and Maple Street, which is basically the core part of Huntington with Fair Oaks in the middle. Okay, any questions on funding sources? That maybe clears up the earlier discussion of the 80 million and how this sort of all folds in together.
That helps. One quick question. So if I'm looking at this one, 277,000 for Fremont from Columbia to Monterey, improvements, street lighting, flashing beacons, stop controlled intersection, install curve advance warning. That's restricted to just those action items for that funding. So it can't be shifted to anything else like moving the bus stop. I'm seeing an example of.
That's exactly right. So
Okay.
the idea there is that then we would be able to use, say, either the other funding source to accomplish the other goal that you have in mind there, and that this one would go specifically to this opportunity.
So these all would need to be specifically called out to a designer.
Exactly, yeah. And now, as far as funding agreements go, this funding agreement has not been executed yet. The other two have. So that's just a matter of, starting the clock ticking on these funds.
Ted, one question for you. The 70 million or so that's allocated for Fair Oaks, whether it's the Rogan funds or the balance of the Measure R funds.
That's what it is, the balance the Measure R
Balance
funds,
the Measure
yeah.
R. Is any of that accessible for any of the Fremont or Huntington proposals, or no, that money is exclusively for Fair Oaks, the Parkway interchange, things like that?
Technically, that money is accessible to any project that meets the eligibility requirements of Measure R MIP. However, the city is already on a path to, that money has already been put on a list to look at the 110 Fair Oaks interchange. And so the initial steps of that, which we talked about at this commission, is for an environmental evaluation of the alternatives of that project. So while the $70 million is on a shelf, basically, earmark's not the right term, but I'm just basically to say like it's kind of set aside for that purpose. That can be changed. Our direction right now between the commission and the council is to move forward with that project. And what that means is getting a funding agreement in place for a very, basically a few $1,000,000 of that project for environmental work and preliminary design, and then bringing a scope that we already sort of talked about with the commission, but we have yet to talk about with the council, that would start the work of evaluating what to do about that Fair Oaks interchange, including, the alternative that Tool proposed is one of those alternatives. So, so the sort of complicated way to answer your question is that money is still available for, any use that it's eligible for, but we're already on a pathway to use it for that purpose, which could change based on, what our direction is.
So we're working with $16 to $17 million for Fremont and Huntington.
That's right, yes.
And that's street improvements, hardware, everything.
That's
Design.
everything, yeah.
Okay.
Well, yep, exactly. That's everything all in, which, seems like a lot of money, but
no, I
you can already see it's getting spent as
Yes.
we're talking, so.
Commissioner
Yeah.
Fisher.
Thank you.
Ted, on bullet number 4, Huntington Drive, install bike lanes and add street lighting. Do we know if bike lanes could be installed without removing lanes on Huntington Drive?
You would likely have to remove lanes. I mean, and you'll see in our, in some of the tool design concepts that there's a couple of different ideas. Definitely repurposing lanes for either, we'll show you the ideas, but there's parking, there's transit only use for buses, bike lanes. Yeah, but our general direction is to, at a very minimum, narrow the lanes on Huntington, but you'd have to make some changes to the lane structure.
Could the lanes be narrowed under the existing speeds and truck and bus traffic on Huntington Drive?
In theory, they could. It just depends on how, how we model the traffic movement on Huntington Drive. So in other words, Huntington Drive could be redesigned. The existing speeds and volume would have to be modeled to see what would happen to those speeds and volume under a different design. I don't
Okay, well, I would just suggest that we make sure we know that the lane widths, whatever is proposed, would meet some sort of acceptable guidelines. And
yeah, and that's one of the very good points that we have to express with the design firm that gets selected because obviously, maybe not so obviously, but that firm is going to have to meet certain specifications, as Chair Hughes has mentioned, as far as state compliance, MUTCD requirements. There's a whole list of design factors that have to be evaluated against the conceptual ideas to see what's actually feasible.
Right, and I just suggest that we look at that early on in the process rather than get down to the 11th hour and find out there's a problem. Also, I would suggest that if it is the intent to remove lanes on Huntington Drive, the backbone of the San Gabriel Valley, that we explicitly say it in the project description here.
Sure. I think that there's a lot to talk about there. Certainly the cost of removing lanes on Huntington Drive would be very, very high. So I think that as we go through this design memo, and since our approach on this is basically looking at a street segment approach, that, we may not be able to accomplish a complete renovation of Huntington Drive under this project. In fact, I can say that we can't because of how much it would cost. So I think we really need to take a look at what do we want to accomplish on Huntington Drive. A lot of these ideas here are just going to exceed the cost of this project.
Please, Commissioner Dunlap.
Director Gerber, I'm glad you mentioned that the tool design for the U-turn in front of the War Memorial is going to be evaluated as part of that environmental documentation. It sounds like.
Yeah.
What
is? Oh, go ahead.
I know we've seen. I think we reviewed a draft scope of work for that from, was it HDR?
It was HNTB.
HNTB. Yeah. Okay. H something. What's the timeline for that going to?
We are still trying to get a funding agreement in place, so we can't even hire them without the money actually in our hands. Mm-hmm. So we were working as recently as yesterday with Metro on trying to get the funding agreement established.
Okay. So that funding agreement is not done yet.
Nope. Okay. The only funding agreement that is active from the $80 million is this 1.1 million for this Fremont Huntington project. Everything else is sort of like positioned, but it's not been.
Realistically, when do you think there will be a funding agreement? Because it seems like that decision is really holding up a lot of things.
Sure.
If we have 70 million and we're trying to figure out what we want to do with it.
So the funding agreements at Metro are extremely complicated. You have to go through this federal tip process, basically. Mm-hmm. And so we have submitted for the January 25 formal amendment release of that funding agreement. So we hope to get a decision in early 2025 about that funding agreement.
Okay. Yeah. And then it would go to council?
Well, what happens is the funding agreement would be put in place with the scope of work that HNTB posed. Mm-hmm. If I think the commission largely was fine with what we refined. I have to kind of go back and see if there's any touch point we need with you. Mm-hmm. But then, we would take HNTB's scope to council with the funding agreement, say, do you want to execute this funding agreement, number one? Do you want to execute the scope of work, number two? And then basically start the process.
Okay. So there could be a scenario where council says, no, we don't want to do this at all. We want to use the money for something else. Or there could be a scenario where the council says, okay, we want to proceed with this and evaluate these alternatives.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Any spectrum of those.
And if I could dovetail on to, I was going to ask the question similarly about the alternative that Tool presented for the U-turn. Part of that talked about acquiring real estate.
Yes.
Potentially.
So we
would need to include, and I'm assuming that would have to be put into the cost factor as well as looking at that as in the environmental study and alternative. Yeah,
we looked at that. That will cost about $3 million for both right-of-way construction support and right-of-way acquisition. But
that'll all get calculated into. It looks at alternatives as we would look at vis-a-vis the loop opportunity versus other opportunities.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. There'd be 6 alternatives that were evaluated under that scope.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So we've looked at this. We looked at the HSIP. So let's talk about what happened. And we won't spend much time on this because you all know. So the planning process for Fremont Huntington has been on for some time. Heard about that in the public comment too. There's earlier iterations of this process. As you all know, we had a fiscal year 23-24 design shred that occurred last fall. We received an early draft memo in 2024, a lot of back and forth with the design consultant, and really the basis for that was we knew we need to arrive here, which is we need to release a document and this document needs to accomplish a couple things. Number one, it has to get the designer on their way, and it also has to show sufficient community engagement process for us to maintain our funding, to possibly increase our funding, because we basically have to show that we've already done all this planning work. So there was a number of things that we had to do, and that's why we had to go through this process with tool design, and we had to refine this memo to what it is today, which, not just talks about the design concepts, but talks about all the other things that we evaluated, who was involved, how they arrived at their conclusions. There's a lot of, other things that if you went through the memo, you'll see that we needed to have, and we helped draft, put into this memo. So, I'd already talked about design prioritization, and then the next step is requesting design proposals that will include environmental review. So quick on the design shred, it was a 3 arterial approach. We did do Fair Oaks as well. We won't talk about Fair Oaks too much tonight, but it was really just sort of like a cost benefit measure to do that too for future. There was 8 members that came into town from all sorts of places. They broke up into 4 groups, 2 members per group, 3 groups, 1 group per corridor, and then 1 is like an overall group. We did a discovery week and we did a design week. So y'all recall that. That's basically how we broke down the process. Okay, so what does the memo say? So really, the memo takes into consideration California goals, which is reducing vehicle miles traveled. And as you'll notice, and we heard it today also in public comment, tool design has a specific ideology about how this can be accomplished, and you'll see that reflected in their designs. So this is some of the things that they went over. I won't read every bullet point on here, but really they're looking at a comprehensive planning use, which includes, considering land use, considering reducing trips, considering expanding the multimodal use of across the city. Specifically, gathered from talking to folks on Fremont and also just other people in the city, the project is trying to address people cutting through traffic on Fremont. The design memo made a specific point of, Fremont did not always used to be what it is today, minus the stub traffic from outside the city. Daytime congestion, high volume usage, heavy truck usage, really not a comfortable bike route, and then not insufficient night lighting, which you see some of our HSIP funding tries to address that. Also some special considerations on Fremont, proximity to schools and churches. The basically small town sort of charm of Fremont Avenue, tree lined and a shady street, and then some of our historic homes are on Fremont Avenue. So let's dive into our intersection by intersection approach. So starting at the very north edge, we think that Columbia Street is going to be one of the harder objectives to tackle. Really what we're trying to do here is, first off, I should mention that most of Columbia Street, as you know, is owned by Pasadena, the city of Pasadena. City of South Pasadena's ownership starts somewhere around the south edge line on Columbia, in that general area. So this specific project would really only manage design and construction from this point south. However, obviously design and construction of this point south is going to be very dependent on what happens on Pasadena Avenue and Columbia in this area. So I'll remind you that we've had some previous conversations with the city of Pasadena and came to a general consensus on reorganizing that intersection in this general way. This was like our prevailing concept for Columbia Street. Now, Columbia Street is part of a $10 million project that Pasadena is undertaking. They're using that same Measure R MIP money for that project. We're contributing $300,000 to that project from another funding source that we didn't even talk about tonight. So we have yet to come up with the final concept that would move on to design for this. But the reason I want to point this out is the original idea was to organize Columbia Street in such a way that prevents folks from what they do now, which is basically weaving around the street because they don't exactly know which lane they should be in. And the idea was basically to create dedicated turn pockets heading north to Pasadena and south to Fremont, as well as addressing that here for folks that are coming from Fair Oaks. So this was generally the idea to improve a little bit of the chaos that's going on out there right now. However, the tool design concept took that a little bit further. In their view, the dedicated right turn south should be removed to deter traffic from heading south on Fremont Avenue. A concept that we have shared with Pasadena, but we have really yet to dive into in detail. And then adding cycling facilities to the street. And we'll get into the cycling facilities get added to Fremont. But the more important thing to notice here is that the curb radii on Fremont has also been adjusted. And it's hard to see here, but this is basically a bulb out that goes here and then terminates right here for on-street parking along Fremont. And on the northern part of Fremont, there's already existing on-street parking on the western side, but it doesn't really start until you get closer to Buena Vista. Now, as we'll get into the other ideas here, tool design did recommend shifting Fremont in such a way that you would be able to have some sort of shared use path on the on the east side. That's a pretty interesting configuration and definitely a consideration for, how much do you want to invest in this section of Fremont as far as restructuring the street. Now, not to say that we can't do some of these other things on Fremont, which is narrowing the street, adding bulb outs, and possibly adding cycling infrastructure. But I just want to reemphasize that Tool's specific recommendation was basically to shift this part of the street over so that you could get cyclists off of the street and onto a shared pathway. So I'll pause there just to, discuss or hear some ideas. And, you don't have to discuss or hear some ideas. Really just presenting them.
One quick question, Ted. Also, would we need to install infrastructure for water for trees?
Yes, of course. So, there's multiple ways that could be done. We're really not tackling those types of ideas now, but certainly those city trees have to survive. But, if you want to get into the nitty gritty of it, city tree maintenance, including watering, is the homeowner's responsibility. So it's likely that, homeowners can actually improve the landscaping of their own parkway, including irrigation. So that's sort of like a, policy discussion about how that responsibility gets sort of distributed.
Commissioner Fisher, you had a question.
So this is the time to ask questions on each of these projects?
Sure, yes, yeah, absolutely.
Let's go back to Columbia and Fremont.
Sure, so I've got two up here. We've got the sort of like working idea between the cities, and then we have the tool concept.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm going back and forth. Oh, I'm sorry, Philip. I keep thinking I'm controlling it from here. That's why nobody's following what I'm saying. Let me make sure I'm up here. All right, so let me go back to here. Thank you.
Okay. I was a little troubled by the statement that do not allow any left turn lanes or auxiliary lanes or right turn lanes in the city. There is almost nothing that a transportation professional can do that improves safety more than a turn lane. A turn lane means you have refuge. You're not worrying about being rear-ended. And since you aren't worrying about being rear-ended, you're not likely to make a sudden move because of horns honking in back of you. It means that you can wait for a proper gap, and it does wonders to improve safety. And I think here on Columbia Street, we wanted to provide a left turn lane just to sort out some sort of calmness to the traffic. We've heard the complaints from residents, especially on the south side of Columbia, which is South Pasadena side, that they can't get into their driveways. And, you know, I think almost all of us have sat through the 3 or 4 cycles to get through there. But agreed, there's a lot of through traffic here. We're just trying to provide some sort of order to the traffic.
Sure. If I can,
go ahead.
Oh, sure. I was just going to add. So just to sort of have this conversation, you'll see this is a through line through a lot of the tool concepts is that in many cases, they'll preserve a left turn lane. In fact, they promote the use of like a 3-lane street so that you can have left turn functionality. And they'll remove the use of a right turn lane. I think in this specific case, the removal of the left turn lane, their thinking was that if the city moves forward in such a way that there's expected reciprocal changes to Pasadena Avenue that Pasadena would pursue, that worked to remove that demand of the left turn lane from Fremont onto Columbia to go up to Pasadena Avenue, that's how they were proposing this. So it's an interesting concept because it's almost like a chicken and egg type of
I know
concept, but
I understand.
that's kind of what they were going for.
Yeah, their concept is that take it away and the traffic will go away.
Well, that plus like the other, that has to be consistently done on the other side too. If it's not, then it might not necessarily work.
And that would lead me to the comment that you can finesse this intersection as they're describing. You can make St. John and Pasadena 2-way, try to make it a little neighborhood street like it was. But as long as those streets lead to a freeway ramp or come from a freeway off ramp, we're going to have this chaos at this intersection. The other comment I wanted to make is they have a raised crosswalk. And normally, if traffic is going too fast, you want to slow it down in advance. Or you want to do something with the signal phasing to make it work better. So the comment was that it's not the best situation for pedestrians. I would agree with that. Pedestrians crossing the south leg have to battle it out with the right turns, which are going to be there whether there's a right turn lane or not. What is missing throughout this report completely is that they didn't look at any signal timing ideas to make it safer. So I've crossed this location many times, and you can make it safer by whenever there's a pedestrian, he presses the button, he gets a separate phase, all other traffic is stopped. And you can provide an exclusive pedestrian phase here. And I think that's a better, less expensive solution than trying to raise the crosswalk where you complicate the drainage by making the pavement go up and then down. Water doesn't flow up and down. It only goes downhill. So I think there's some other options they could have looked at here.
Thank you.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Ted, if we could go back, or Philip, maybe a slide shows the striping, proposed striping adjustments. I guess it was the other way.
Sorry.
On.
Sorry, I'm messing with it too.
There it is.
Yeah.
All right. So this concept with which I agree, is this a concept that the two cities have agreed upon?
Yes, in sort of theory, like as a very early concept before anybody actually got to work on it. Yeah,
okay.
Meaning like they're still trying to get their funding agreement processed. We're still trying to decide what to do with the Fremont component of it. So this is where we are right now.
Okay. Is one of the themes that we've repeated so many years is that one of the keys to managing traffic on Fremont is managing it at the gateways, right? And this is obviously a critical one. And there are a lot of interesting suggestions along the way, and we'll get to those. But I like the idea of tightening up the intersection. I think that makes a lot of sense. I like the idea of making it safer for pedestrians to cross. As has been mentioned, coordination with Pasadena is critical. because we're relying on them to help us manage the traffic flow south that's being dumped onto Fremont. And to John's point, wondering what can be done in terms of signal timing adjustments, turn restrictions, so that all that volume isn't being dumped onto Fremont after it comes down Pasadena, whether it's, I think there's a right turn green arrow there. I'm not 100% positive. I think there is, from eastbound Fremont onto eastbound Columbia onto southbound Fremont. If that's the case, all that's doing is encouraging a flow, right? So wondering if we need to have a right turn arrow and if we should have no right turn on red, something that's controlling the flow, the volume of traffic onto Fremont. So not just pulling out the curbs, because that's not going to stop the cars from turning onto the street. What can we do to prohibit or control the number of turns per cycle per green, right? So thinking about ways we can manage the traffic through those measures that might be easier and more cost effective than some of these other things. Because to me, it's about bang for the buck. And the idea of shifting the whole street over, in part to accommodate bicycle facilities, and it's a beautiful design. I'm wondering what the demand is. Are there a lot of cyclists on that street? Is that something that we should be planning for? Or, is it worth the investment is really my question.
Sure, a good question. So number one, it's one of those things where the existing condition might just prevent people from using it as a cycling route, and therefore you don't see cyclists sort of like something that we might not necessarily know. It is a part of our bike plan, but there are other opportunities to provide cycling facilities without having to shift the entire street in with that providing it. It was just their recommendation, of course, cost considerations aside, as many of these recommendations are, to provide that separate track because largely in this section of the city, it can be uninterrupted. That'd be a difficult thing to do in other parts of the city where there's, lots of driveways or other impediments. You don't have that in this case in that section. So that was one of the recommendations.
So is the street as it exists wide enough to accommodate class 2 bicycle facilities on both
if
sides?
you were to restructure the street to narrow it to this 2-lane route and basically move things over, you could fit it into the right of way, but
without rebuilding the street.
Oh, no, not without rebuilding the street. Yeah, you could add bike lane on the street itself.
Yes. There's enough width for that.
Yes, you could do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Great. Thank you.
Ted, quick question. One of the things I know had been talked about over the years was to lose again that right-hand turn arrow, green arrow, and to try to minimize people from utilizing Fremont altogether going southbound. So it's almost like, how do you get them to make the turn, but continue forth and really go to Fair Oaks, which is the more commercial driven, because you don't want the trucks, you don't want the traffic. And again, there was discussions like, how do you keep it so that we're flowing, to your point on signals and timing, so that you do not have people want to make those right turns and go south?
Sure, and there is currently that green right turn arrow out there now, as as Commissioner Abelson mentioned. But to address your comment, that's basically what Tool was trying to accomplish by making it less desirable, physically difficult for a truck, for a large vehicle, and less desirable, and actually visually presenting Fremont as a small or a residential street. That's kind of what they're trying to accomplish. So there's lots of considerations here. Obviously, there's cons to doing it this way, but that's basically what they were trying to do.
Thank you.
Okay, great comments. We've got all those outlined here. So I think what we'll do is, we've got a couple different alternatives to consider here. Our very next step is actually to discuss this with Pasadena. We've already got that meeting scheduled. But we can incorporate a number of these points for consideration into the design scope. Thank you.
Ted, one quick last point. In the discussions with Pasadena, there was a point at some point where they talked about losing that exit that goes and continues and exits onto Pasadena Avenue and then St. John. And to get people to go on the Delmar exit and close off the other when they reconstruct the whole stub there. Is that a possibility? Is that an alternative? Then that sort of minimizes all this altogether.
I
Because
mean,
the traffic will not be coming this far south.
really in Pasadena, anything's a possibility right now. They're so early in the process of still considering how to use like a land use consideration that really haven't even gotten that far. The initial evaluations were really just looking at, you know, if they can maintain safe operations, you know, given a couple different options, but that process is pretty far away.
Because there was also discussion that when you come off and you're right there at the intersection and you're going to proceed to St. John, that because the park is right there, that there was discussion at one point of closing that all off and not making it, I mean, you couldn't go there. It would be boarded, you know, boarded.
Sure,
barricaded,
understood.
et
You know,
cetera.
we're
And you would
tracking
have to
this.
go.
You know, we're tracking this as part of our own sort of 7-10 collaboration project. So we'll certainly keep you all updated about where we are with that.
Thank you.
Of course. Okay, so moving on to the next segment here. Thanks, Philip. So this is basically south of Columbia Street, between Columbia and Buena Vista. So again, really kind of continuing the configuration you already saw at Columbia. They have the idea of shifting the street, narrowing it down to 2 travel lanes, and then adding this shared use path on the east side. Now, again, pretty elaborate configuration. If you have comments about the both about what we're presented here, but also just the concept of applying a treatment to Fremont Avenue, even if there isn't a reconstruction effort going on. So at the moment, Fremont Avenue is 2 lanes, you know, a decent amount of space, and then there's parking on the west side, but a lot of it is red curb for the majority of Columbia South at the moment. So there's quite a bit of space on Fremont Avenue. And so the idea here, whether it's with a full reconstruction and changing, you know, shifting the street, or, you know, doing something else that narrows the street, that's kind of what we're looking at as far as the design concept goes.
I'll take
Go
a
ahead.
comment if that's okay.
Yes, please.
So I certainly like the idea of narrowing the street visually for vehicles. I certainly like the idea of providing a path for bicycles on the street. And if there's capacity as the street now exists to do that, then I think that seems like a wise approach. I think completely rebuilding the street to do this, I think is going to suck up a pretty impressive amount of the budget, which isn't going to leave a lot for the rest of Fremont and Huntington, I would think. I don't know the numbers. We haven't seen them yet. I think this is beautiful. I love it. But it seems like it may be a bit aggressive, and that maybe there are ways to manage the traffic and make it more pedestrian bike resident friendly that don't require quite this extent of work.
Sure. So right now our thought is, of course, getting some cost estimates for the extent of this type of cross section. But in addition, narrowing the lanes on Fremont, adding basically, you know, I don't know if we wouldn't necessarily call them bulb outs. They'd basically be these like extended sort of Green Street, you know, bringing the curb out on the west side on the area where right now is red curb to narrow the street further. That's one of the ideas that we could propose, an alternative we could propose to the consultant to cost out for us. But to achieve the same goal of, you know, getting this down to a fairly narrow 2-lane street that affords, still affords parking where existing parking remains, but visually and also structurally narrowing the curb line. Yeah.
Just a follow-on comment. So I don't see the point of the mid-block curb extensions or bulb outs, whatever you want to call them. I think having them, for example, at Buena Vista makes a lot of sense. Where there's a pedestrian crossing across Fremont makes a lot of sense to me, but just a mid-block curb extension like this, when it takes away parking. I don't know what the demand is on that street. I do see the parking tees, but I know that was for different reasons. But I believe there is some parking on that street, so I would just be concerned about adding mid-block.
This would really be towards the northern section. You know, if we wanted to move forward with the alternative where the interface with Fremont and Columbia gets narrowed, we'd want to continue that narrowing down to some level without removing existing parking, if
Yeah,
that
so
makes
maybe where the
sense.
existing red curb is as you go south on Fremont from Columbia, west side.
Yeah,
That makes sense. Yeah.
that's one of the ideas we want the designer to consider.
Yeah.
I would also comment on the bulb outs mid-block because I think that's going to take a lot of construction, a lot of cost that might be used better elsewhere.
But speaking on, sorry,
Wait, no,
this is mostly a North Star, right? Like the plan was to never do all of this for $16 million. $16 million is not a lot of money, right? This is really to put together a vision of what the street can be. You know, certainly 16 million is the first step in that direction where we can advance some of these and work with the community because there are going to be trade-offs with everything. So we need more community, like
that's a good
input on
comment.
some of this, but
because you know what we want to accomplish here is that we're not going to be able to do everything. The things that we do want to do, we want to be in line with the vision for the future as well. So let's say that let's say that we want to narrow Fremont Avenue in this segment. We want to do it in such a way that if we are able to fund some pretty beautiful and substantial improvements, that we provide some immediate relief to the street in this project, but in such a way that won't preclude us from doing something else also in the future.
So we're going to ask the designer to put together drawings for projects or items that we know we're not going to implement now. Is that what you're suggesting?
Not necessarily. We'll ask for costs, but as far as construction documents go, we won't develop those now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Of course.
Commissioner Fisher, question?
Yes, I find this to be a pretty picture. And I'm wondering if this design means that at the intersection with Columbia, that there wouldn't be a left turn and right turn lane, but only one approach lane that turning traffic must share.
In their concept, that's what it looks like. Doesn't necessarily have to be the case. You know, the three-dimensional diagram you saw ends on like this on the north side, but you could have something like this in theory, and then of course, since you have the right of way, it could expand out to a turn pocket at the north end if you wanted it to.
I just caution the reasoning that if you reduce lanes, therefore you reduce traffic. I think what could happen here is you take away the additional turning lane at Columbia, and you have a long queue of traffic that blocks driveways. And we've heard the complaints before. So we really have to think through, if you do this, what will be the effect? It's not that traffic goes away. It's that traffic reemerges in some other way. You may get rid of one problem, you may create another. The other comment I have is that how nice it would be to have a bike path, shared use path along the east side, along the oak lawn rock wall that's there. But on the east side, right when you get to Buena Vista, you have a very sharp reverse curve, and you have a severe downhill slope. And then you have multiple intersections and alleys and such that come one right after another before you get to the railroad crossing. You don't want a steep slope for bicyclists. They can run out of control real easily. And then along the east side of Fremont, as you pass through the bridge over the Parkway and the bridge for the Gold Line, pedestrians are not allowed on the east side. The sidewalk's too narrow, and it's too easy for people to walk into the path of the Gold Line tracks. So this looks good here, but once you get a little bit south of there, I don't think any of it works.
Thank you.
I mean, I agree in understanding more about the impacts of turning movements, but I would say that the northbound right turn from Fremont to Columbia, that volume's pretty light today, at least from my own experience. Typically, people queue up making the left turn and the left turn backs up into the through lane. And then you can't, if you're trying to turn right, you don't access the right turn lane because the through traffic turning left is blocking it.
Well, that's a good point. And that brings up another question I had. Did they collect any count data to help inform their recommendations?
No, this was all preliminary design work. The count data would be collected with the designer scope because they'd have to model the impacts of the changes.
Well, okay,
Yeah.
but you need to know whether it works and whether Commissioner Dunlap's comments would mean that it would still work or whether it mean it wouldn't work. You need to know that early on. And normally you either look at available count data or you collect count data to help you make that determination.
As far as a network model, we'd want to give the designer these couple of scenarios, no turn pockets, preserve a left turn pocket, narrow lane widths, and then they would help us model those handful of scenarios with counts that are collected to see what would happen. But we want to, of course, we want to refine what we're asking them to do.
I'll add one more comment on that. The right turn lane probably isn't needed for right turn demand. I will agree that it is relatively light compared to the left turn demand, but it is there to provide a refuge lane when there is a PED crossing from north to south or south to north. So it allows that car to remain there and not block the whole queue of traffic there.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, just two
Yes.
very quick follow-ons. It's more of a theme too. I'd just like us to keep in mind the goals, right? If the goal is to manage the volume and speed of traffic on Fremont, it seems like choking, controlling, minimizing, limiting the traffic flowing into the neighborhood makes sense. Choking and making it extremely difficult to get out is going to, I'm concerned about traffic backup and the additional impacts to the residents. And then residents have to be able to get out of this neighborhood too, right? There are people who live on Fremont, and if they can't get out, that's a problem. And then the other just overall concern, and I know it's part of the considerations, is traffic shifting, right? So, if traffic is backing up on a particular street, whatever street it is, and there's an easy way out, such as Buena Vista. So you're going north on Fremont, you get stuck in backup, you turn left on Buena Vista, cut through the neighborhood, get on Orange Grove and get back in line on Columbia, or do all kinds of other creative things. We need to just keep in mind, right? Because the city has done things before and not considered impacts, and it's hurt neighborhoods. So we just need to keep all of this in mind as we're going forward. That are we potentially solving a problem, creating multiple others, right? And what balance should we strike? Thank you.
And I guess going on that, I think the community engagement part is, and I think the suggestion to have some sort of ad hoc committee is a good one in the sense to, this design, these MTIC meetings, people can hear us talk a lot, but they have a lot to say. And I don't want to repeat something like the Grand Avenue bike lane where, it's agendized. We talked about it at council multiple times. We talked about it at commissions multiple times. We do outreach, and then it happens and people are surprised about it. So as much as I'm glad we did this input early and got all this feedback, and I think, like you said, it's priceless to have all this, and I think they really did like an excellent job in providing us a North Star and a vision for what this can be. We can't wait 2 years until we get these funding agreements in place to re-engage people, we kind of need to keep them updated throughout the entire process. So I was thinking about, I was just kind of, I know we got a lot of things to go through, but step one, you said that the designer will further prioritize what goes into the project. Is the community going to be a part of that, or is it just going to be like an engineer? I'm just kind of thinking about that, what that step would look like.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with your point completely. What we need to do for the next community step is to have something for them to look at and to understand what the impacts are going to be. We need costs. We need to understand what's feasible. That's the information the community needs next. And so the designer will do, the amount of work necessary to review the alternatives we're giving them now to give those decision points to the community. And it won't probably necessarily happen at an MTech meeting. Like this would be something better that would be more in the line of what we did last fall, is that we have these things up, people can walk around, they can ask questions, give us appropriate feedback of what they're thinking before we move on with the design process. But I really don't, to your point, we're making this stop with MTech to make sure we didn't miss anything for the procurement step of this design process. But, the next engagement is to show them something that is real, that, can be made. And the question is how long is it going to take and how much is it going to cost? And that might just basically, people will be like, well, this makes more sense to do it this way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to stress the community input and having people give really good impact because, we have great leaders. Sometimes they're with you until they're not. And then, they get their inboxes get filled with people upset, and then the direction changes and we're doing, things get shelved or things get taken out. So
sure, and that will likely happen in this project not because of a sort of like policy direction, but more so the idea is that we arrive at council eventually with the project when the design is mostly complete and we're trying to award the contract. Really, the design process belongs to the community from here on out.
Right. There's going to be a lot of negative reactions, and
Yeah.
people are going to be like, I can't lose parking. I can't, I walk my dog right there. And then they're going to have 30 people right here yelling at a council member, and they're going to say, oh, yeah, I don't think we're ready to move forward with this, despite us investing years and years and years in this process. So we really need to kind of think about that.
I think it's important that we do consider looking at the steps to maybe have a ad hoc, community involved group, because that has been structured before. So you have multiple people that are on. So you've got Meridian, Matters and Marengo, and you've got Fletcher and the streets that we've heard about time and time and time again, so that they're also part of this process as we look at the city in a holistic standpoint. And also it helps understand what this process is and what our limitations are, what costs are. So you get, again, that engagement and understanding of everyone involved. And, you can have council members with our ad hoc for water council. There was city council members, there was public, various, experiences and backgrounds that had knowledge, and it helped as a good sounding board in developing the vision for the water system at the time.
Sure, I think that's a valuable exercise, very valuable. I think it probably has its place a bit later in the design process when we have some real, decisions to make. I think now we're trying to sort of sort through a lot of stuff, get to the meat of it.
Yeah, it can come, but I do think it would
if
be
you do that too
tool.
early, and then we can continue going all sorts of directions and not ever get the project done. So I think that once we refine it down to this is what we're looking at, some of those more critical decisions as far as alternatives go, we understand the costs, impacts, then we get some of the community leaders on a committee to evaluate those. Okay. All right, let's keep going here. So Buena Vista Street, this was their concept. So let me just say that they originally had looked at a traffic circle at this location, but given, the steep grade, to Commissioner Fisher's comment, they arrived at this concept, which is basically narrowing the intersection, removing that right turn. And the reason they're removing that right turn on Buena Vista is because they, observed that people take that right turn pretty fast. They're basically kind of swooping to the intersection. It's one of the reasons that we added that temporary sort of like delineator triangle there. They're adding bulb outs to shorten the crosswalks. There's an opportunity because of that narrowing to add a green swale on the east side. And they basically have these smaller travel lanes and, an island for crossing. This currently doesn't have a three-way stop. It's just the Buena Vista is the stop, of course. So this is the idea that they came up with after a couple iterations. So if you have comments, that's great. If not, we can keep going.
No, I'll just say I'm surprised I'm saying this about a bulb out, but I like this design. I think I fully support removing the right turn lane. The green swale that you referenced on the east, I guess that's the east curb. What is that exactly? Is that essentially a curb extension or is that just paint? What is that?
It's basically a curb extension, but it's kind of like this, like kind of a curve more than a bulb out.
But they pull out the curb. They pull out the curb somewhat.
Yeah.
Right, to narrow the intersection.
Exactly. The storm drain infrastructure is on the west side.
Okay.
So I don't know if I would necessarily call it a swale, that it like doesn't serve like it might guide some drainage, but actually the drainage occurs on the other side. So they called it that, but it's really just kind of like a green strip of like adding some.
It doesn't have a water capture feature.
No, I mean, maybe it could, but I don't envision how it would work in the current drainage pattern. Yeah.
So I like it. I like the medians. How are the surfaces, and maybe this is way too early and I shouldn't be asking this, the surfaces of these medians and extensions and so forth, is it landscaping? Is it grass? Is it concrete? And of course, landscaping is the most, enhances beautification and look and feel. But I just also, I look at some of the medians we currently have, including Orange Grove at the 110, and they're a disaster. So I just, if we could keep in mind what the plan is there, both, currently in terms of the installation and then long-term, what's going to work maintenance-wise, that would be helpful, I think. And I don't know if they did, what's their proposal, or is that too early? Is it too early in the
They didn't get that far. I mean, basically what you see here is what we have, but understand your concern. I mean, we basically have medians in our landscaping contract, and the more drought tolerant the medians are, the better, the easier they are to maintain.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And there's signal equipment there, like a blinking yellow light or something like that, some signage maybe. Is the proposal to get rid of that old antiquated stuff or to keep it, or?
They didn't talk about that, but the idea would be that, yeah, that would be either upgraded or if it was deemed unnecessary by the designer because of the redesign, that would be removed.
Because by my comments, they're crazy unattractive. They're necessary at the moment, right? Because there's nothing else there. But I'm just thinking long term, if we're talking about look and feel and restoring a residential feel of the street and less of an arterial, taking away some of that equipment, unless it's necessary, I think would be a helpful contributor.
Of course.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, I'm going to suggest something here that be studied as a way to improve conditions on Fremont Avenue and a way to reduce speeds. Two factors. One, it is difficult for pedestrians to get from the east side to the west side. And you must cross because once you get to near the gold line, the sidewalk is closed to you. So you have to get to the west side to really get anywhere. If you try to cross here, there's a little bit of a sight distance issue, and the cars are coming relatively fast, going southbound, and they're sometimes even go faster northbound because they got gravity going against them. I would recommend that the consultants consider a traffic control signal at this location. It probably would not meet conventional warrants, but it would meet the unusual circumstances issue. And the signal would serve to allow pedestrians, and there probably aren't many, but for those who live on the east side, there's a couple of intersections just to the south of this drawing. They need to get to the other side. So they would come to the Buena Vista Street intersection and be able to cross under traffic signal control. But also it could serve as a speed regulation device where if you're detected by a detector and you're going too fast, to make it safely down the downgrade and around the reverse curve, the signal would remain red until you get very close to the intersection. Then after you've slowed down, it would turn green for you. So it's called a rest in red signal. It can be operated different ways, but the idea is you're speeding, you're detected, the signal remains red until you get close to the intersection, and then it turns green after you've slowed down. And I think that could be implemented at a lot less cost than all this pavement reallocation we're talking about. So I would ask that that be considered as part of the evaluation of this location.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much. On Gravalia Street, as we've been discussing, there's restrictive pedestrian access because of the closed walkway. So Tool's concept is to change this and take advantage of the larger right-of-way in this location. Excuse me. So they're suggesting that there's, to continue on their concept of the separated bike lanes, of course, they have that in their drawing here. So they would address that existing closed sidewalk by reconfiguring that the way the bridge crossing is allocated. They did consider a roundabout in this location, but ultimately decided it wasn't feasible due to the width constraints. But they have shown here that they've added crosswalks at each location. One of the benefits of this design is that a cyclist who is going through this intersection can actually, if they say they're going north, they can veer right and then kind of take a left and go across the tracks at a 90-degree angle instead of at the like 45-degree angle that they have to traverse it currently. They identified that cyclists would need spaces to wait when a gate came down in this configuration, and the gate arm would have to be also modified because of the change in the dimension of the street. There was previously a channelization, basically like these little kind of island medians on the west side. They've removed that in this design and narrowed that west leg of the street. And with that, they've opened up the opportunity to use the public space to the northwest. Right now, that there's an area there, but it's basically kind of fenced off with a bar. So lots of ideas here, to consider.
Mr. Fisher.
Several comments. The crosswalk on the east leg. As you are walking north, if you look at the railroad tracks, the railroad right-of-way on the northeast part of the intersection, it almost looks inviting, almost looks like the roadway. It's right in front of you. Yeah, you should see the tracks and know better, but a 6-year-old kid may not fully realize that. So I know when this commission considered that, or I guess the prior commission considered that before, we rejected that concept. But also the bridge has a very narrow sidewalk on the east side, and that would be another consideration. Um, gee, lost my train of thought. Maybe it'll come back to me. For the crosswalk on the west leg, you really need to make the pedestrian signal stick out. It's covered by ivy. And can't see it, so something else needs to be done there. Attach it to the signal pole. But the reason for the little short teardrop median islands is so that the gate goes down, and with the median island, you can't go around the gate. That's why they're there. So you would have to have those median islands. And I think if you contact Metro, that's what they'd tell you. And I think also they would tell you that they probably don't want the crosswalk on the east leg because of the visually inviting nature of the opening of the track area.
Thank you.
Questions?
No questions. I agree that you need to run this one by Metro. They're probably going to have 1,000 comments on it, but really, really beautiful. That the parcel in the northwest corner, is that city right away?
Yeah, and so if you see it now, it's basically just a shaded area, but again, there's basically like a bar railing that goes around it.
Yeah.
So
it'd make it really beautiful pocket park looking over.
Yeah, that was the
City
concept
Council
provided here. So that's a possibility.
Was that where they were trying to get to? I thought same kind of thing. Were they doing like a green space, but then part of that was because of looking at this longer arm, which is where they were trying to think about, I guess, removing your diamond, medians for the arm and for safety. But I think the big thing we need to be really careful of is the safety with the train, because if you can get around that, kids will get around it and they'll try. We don't want any fatalities or injuries. So, the most protection we can provide around the train track, because that is pretty open over there.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we're down on Mission Street here. So really Tool's focus was they're aware of the future plans for the road diet along Mission Street and the eventual permanent changes to Mission Street if the temporary project is successful. And so they wanted to emphasize Mission's presence of Main Street. Currently 4 lanes, which we have a separate idea on how to reduce that down to a 3-lane system. And so you can see that represented here. They did, again, here remove right turns for the same reasons that they talked about removing right turns and the other concept to keep traffic from entering Fremont Avenue. They did emphasize the artistic paving. This actually has a raised, the whole intersection is essentially raised. You can see that there's like brick sort of curbs at the 4 corners, but it's supposed to be kind of more like a pedestrian plaza at this intersection. Noting that there is intended to be a future development on the north or west corner. They recommended bus stop relocation. Currently, the bus stop is on the gas station side. It would be moved to what is now the Caro side. And then a staff comment is considering how this would not work if we did move forward with one of the alternatives of the slow street, which is to incorporate class 2 bike lanes. And so we would have to redesign this in such a way to be able to fit the bike lanes through this intersection. Because there's currently bulb outs in the intersection, which somewhat reduce the bike lane capacity down to 4 feet in our current design. This actually brings those bulb outs even further out. So, in this solution, you'd only be able to accomplish a shared bicycle lane through Fremont Avenue. So we've got a couple alternatives already sort of queued up for the designer to consider, including what we're talking about already on Mission Street.
I would say that I really like the brick intersection. I think it's really beautiful. I've seen my college town has something like this, and it's really nice. Like the roadways kind of come up to grade, and then you have some decorative ballers around and some detectable warning surfaces, and it's the busiest intersection in town, and it's a nice like gateway to the university and the business district. They don't extend the brick all the way down the roadway. I don't know if that's a cost thing, but at the intersection it's really nice. So whether this is the intersection or if it's the one closer to the Meridian and the Gold Line crossing, I've
Yeah.
seen this done, and especially when you bring it up to the grade of the sidewalk, it's really nice.
They, one of the things they wrote about in the report was utilizing the brick as sort of like a traffic calming mechanism because people will drive slowly on the brick. Would definitely alter our pavement management program quite a bit to have the brick there for maintenance, but this was the idea they came up with. So
I have okay, so I have a bit of a so I'm not in favor of removing the right turn lanes. It takes away capacity for the bike lane as you described. I think if we need to permit the safe movement, right, of all modes, including cars, and choking traffic like this at this intersection, which is going to create, I think, negative impacts on the street for multiple modes. Second, I agree with Eric. I like the idea of a raised intersection. I like this decorative treatment. I don't quite understand why it's at Mission and Fremont. I think Mission and Meridian would make a lot more sense than here. And I'm not quite sure what the purpose of the here at this location, the raised intersection is for exactly. So I think it's nifty, but I think maybe a different location for that tool, I think might be good. And I think we should consider retaining the right turn lanes.
I think this concept is a bit like, if you build it, they will come type of like trying to bring the concept of the main street and stretch it between Mission Meridian to Mission Fremont so that, encouraging folks to use Fremont as a multimodal corridor, bring some kind of into Mission Street this way. That's the idea anyway. I think that's why they were showing it here versus like, at the moment, you kind of put that intersection there and it looks a little bit out of place. You got an empty lot on one corner, you got a gas station on another corner.
Right.
I think the idea was that it would promote that different usage in the future.
Okay.
My thought would be similar in that if I could do two creative intersections, it would be Meridian Mission and Fair Oaks Mission.
Yeah.
So that you've got these two bookends that kind of dovetail and show that, they're the borders of our business district, if you will, and that, if we could do a third, but I'd rather see the money spent. So you've got Mission, Fair Oaks, and Meridian Mission to be these decorative, particularly Meridian, because you're going to capture and hopefully people even that don't want to stop that are on the Gold Line going, or A line or whatever it's called now, going by, go, oh, that's so cool. Look at that. Oh, I want to get off. I want to see what's going on over there. So you would get this invitation to come see the city.
And I'm not aware about speeding or safety issues at this intersection that would sort of dictate that. I know that's not what's behind this necessarily. But I just think maybe that's better location elsewhere.
Thank you.
Do you have a question, Commissioner Fisher?
I always have a comment. This looks just beautiful from the bird's eye view. I love the tone of the competing tones of the brick and such. I assume there's a commercially available brick that will withstand the loads of the vehicle and truck traffic that travels here. I don't know that there is, but that would be a criteria. But I'm trying to think of all the individual parts and the grouting that would be required. And every time you have a manhole project or you need to dig and get to a utility, it would create a challenge to maintain this. Am I correct?
Yeah, one alternative here, not necessarily what Tool was going for, but would be like a scored concrete that was stained in such a way that would, try to achieve that look. They specifically mentioned brick. Um, like I mentioned, I'm half joking about us being a pavement management challenge for the street. It is very nice looking. It would definitely be something we have to explore as almost like its own sort of investigation with the design consultant about how this would be feasible from a maintenance perspective.
And could you describe how this would affect drainage along the gutter?
Sure. Certainly, this is done as Commissioner Dunlap mentioned. We see some of this work done on the East Coast and in the East South. Their streets are crowned a bit different to manage that. A little bit different than they're done out here from my perspective. So yeah, that would have to be taken into consideration how that is. How that's basically installed so that you'd still have the adequate drainage to the gutters.
Does that mean that where the intersection suddenly rises up and then suddenly rises down, that you might have to have either catch basins or some sort of conduit beneath the surface to handle the water?
Yeah, you basically have to build like a culvert that crosses underneath the curb so that it catches on one side and then basically outlets to the other side to where the catch basin is.
Okay, and can those be kept clean somehow? Would you have to flush them periodically, or how would you keep those from having paper and other products stuck in them?
Yeah, they have to be cleaned. So typically we'll do 3 cleanings in the wet season and then 1 cleaning in the dry season. So, just as a point of reference, the RFB design that we're doing at Mission and Diamond has one of these existing sort of, because of the little bulb out there, it has one of these existing sort of like crossover culverts where it collects drainage on Mission, I believe, and then funnels it over to Diamond. So, a little bit of an expensive configuration to get it done, but it allows you to basically build out beyond the build out above the catch basin so that you can have water sort of move underneath the sidewalk and out.
Okay.
But yeah, it is something that you have to configure correctly.
And the text said that that they would remove the right turn only lanes. Again, I'll emphasize that if I have a right turn lane, I'm going to be sure to yield to the pedestrian because I'm not rushed. There's not anyone coming through behind me. I don't feel the fear of a rear end collision. I want to wait for the pedestrians and then turn. On the other hand, when you're making your right turn from a through lane, you feel pressure to try to quickly get through the gaps in PEDs, and I don't think it's the best thing for PEDs. So I think the recommendation to remove a right turn lane is not well thought out, and I think we should all take offense where it says the intersection emphasizes vehicle movement over pedestrians. You want to accommodate all modes. You want to accommodate all modes. So, I don't think any of the engineering staff here is trying to compromise safety for pets. I think the right turn lane actually enhances the safety for pedestrians.
Thank you.
I was going to pile on, but I'm not because it's, it's late.
We can, it is getting late. We'll keep going, of course. As a commission, you can always give us some direction that we can always pause and do, another session of this if we want to. There's a lot to cover. I mean, we had originally broken this up into 3 pieces, but for our purposes to do the design as one comprehensive thing, we reconsolidated the memos. They were originally 3 different memos. So I just want to throw that out there. It is a lot of material, so don't,
I was gonna say you were reading my mind. I was thinking if we can get through Fremont tonight, that's a win.
Sure, it's
But
your
that's
call.
up to the
While you ponder that, I'll keep going. So this one, I'll make sure I didn't jump too far ahead. So this really deals with Linden, Bank, Rollin, Oak. Like this particular photo is, or this particular image is of Linden. But the recommendations are sort of provided in this whole sort of small corridor between the high school and Holy Family and all the interaction and the intersections in between. So we would really look at, as I mentioned, because we're giving the designer these street segments for them to scope and cost out for prioritization, we would treat this as one section. So we would want to, evaluate all 4 intersections together as far as the design work goes. Similar to Mission, removed left turns, in this case to minimize crossing distances. Again, raise the crossings. This one has the 2-way bike facility, as you can see on the east side. One comment from Tool that we thought was kind of cool was a potential student-driven artistic design process that we could allow students to get engaged with. Obviously, it doesn't impact the operation, but it's just like a nice community element there. Continuing the curbside drop-off implementation, and what their main comment there was that could be a multi-use. So if it's for school drop-off and pickup during the week, it could be used alternatively for some other use for, say, a school event if necessary. And emphasizing, because it is a school, that the bulb outs that you see are actually enlarged to move further north and further south to keep folks away from the intersection and really kind of daylight the crossings. Because when these intersections get crossed, you really have a lot of students crossing. They're kind of like overwhelming the crosswalk. It's not just like everybody's inside the crosswalk bounds. So really providing a generous amount of width for that. So any thoughts on this, questions or comments?
All right. Are they proposing this type of treatment at every one of these intersections? Or
Not necessarily. They've shown this at Linden because it's the, basically closest to the high school, even though you've got Bank there, which it's actually at the high school. But I think the concept applies that you could do it at various points.
So my thought is this is a great idea, and I think it makes more sense at Bank, right? Because that's where the majority of the students cross. There's a signal there. There is not one at Linden, as far as I recall.
Yeah, there would be an RFB in this scenario. It's basically like an existing condition. You don't see it represented here, but that's what we're told.
I don't know if it makes sense to encourage people to cross at Linden when Bank seems to be the one that's a more demand and more direct access to the school. So maybe something like a raised intersection at Bank makes sense. I like the extended bulb outs, for example, at Bank, and then also at Oak, right? Where they're, I think that's probably what the 2 key intersections in terms of student crossings are just highest volume. That makes sense to me.
I think we might have to look also at, as you look at costing things, how much more is it? I mean, do we need the brick, the raised, et cetera, versus getting the bulb outs we would need for the safety of the students? Where do we balance? And to the point, I also agree that Bank and Oak are the ones that I see most of the students crossing. Any other questions? Commissioner Fisher, Commissioner Dunlap?
Yes, Ted. I'm not sure how this drawing is to be interpreted. Does it remove the loading or parking?
It does not. It maintains it. It's basically that area that you see on the south west corner. Just imagine that it's farther south from the intersection. So that was a comment that they made, that they would maintain the loading, the current loading. Right now, it's in the wrong spot in the concept because they didn't draw the whole length south of Bank to show you where it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do I interpret the drawing correctly to remove the left turn lanes?
Yes, that was a comment they made, and their objective was number one, to minimize traffic entry onto Fremont, and number two, to minimize the crossing distances by narrowing the street.
And it is noted that the crossings are made under signal control, correct?
At Linden, not the northern leg would be with the new RRFB. The others at Linden would not be, but correct to say that at Bank and Oak, they'd be under crossing control.
Under signal control.
Under signal control, yeah, sorry.
Crossing distance isn't that important. So there are churches, the Women's Club, the high school along here. And with the left turn lanes removed, that means that would block traffic, leading to more rear-end collisions. I just cannot understand myself why you would remove a left turn lane. It's a convenience to everyone and a safety measure. End of comment.
Sure, thanks. I would echo John's thoughts about the removal of the left turn lane. We have to remember, on the one hand, I understand about speeds and volume, but we also have to remember that people live on the streets that intersect with Fremont and need to have the ability to enter and exit their streets, right? And if it's all backed up because there is no two-way turn lane, I think we have to allow for safe turn movements. And the comments reversed because my question was going to be, where is the space for the two-way bike facility coming from? I think you just told us, right?
Yes, yeah.
So we can't have, if we were to retain the two-way turn lane, how is there a way to accommodate a bike facility as well? Or would it just be like class 2 lanes in each direction on the pavement, or what? Or no?
No, I don't think you'd be able to. Basically, your left turn lane, as far as a right-of-way cross-section, becomes your shared use pathway.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think losing the left-hand turn, particularly going where you're making the turn and you're going into the high school parking lot, to not have a left-hand turn, it's going to be a real problem. Because you're going to have so many cars, as you say, backed up, trying to get into that parking lot.
So most of the time they'll enter on Linden. Yeah, they'll enter from Fremont on Linden. That's their pattern. And then they drive to the parking lot and exit on Bank. So yeah, that's a good point.
As we sit here, though, if they're coming north and they want to turn on Linden, they're going to be sitting there in the through lane waiting to turn left. I think that's unacceptable, dangerous. So, and again, I just want to reiterate, trying to focus on the gateways, right? And keeping people out at those instead of making it impossible to navigate these streets for the people who live adjacent to them, and just being concerned about impacts. Yeah.
Thanks for the comment.
Everything's a trade-off.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so our last stop on Fremont is, sorry, 2 more stops. The south of Huntington cross section. We looked at sorry, Philip, I'm having trouble advancing the next one. We looked at the cross section on the north section of Fremont. This is the southern section. Similar. However, you've got a transit dedicated lane there you could see, and the idea is that offers the opportunity for connectivity with bicycle facilities, including bicycle parking. This would eliminate the center turn lanes in most cases, except for at intersections that have high volume. So they did make that comment. And then, of course, some of the other aspects that you see with the other intersections with high visibility crosswalks. So you can see the intersection there and the cross section measured out. So you got the 11-foot lanes, 12-foot transit lane, 8-foot parking lane. And because it's wider, you still have the room for the shared cycle track, but of course that means moving the entire cross section over to accommodate that.
So this is Fremont, every intersection between Huntington and Alhambra Road?
Yes, exactly. With, you could add a left turn pocket and remove the parking, obviously at the intersection.
And the street is wide enough to accommodate all of this. Doesn't sound like it
Yeah,
is,
because
but
we end up losing, if you look over, just south of Grocery Outlet, you end up, narrowing a lane.
I mean, maybe it is. It just visually
Yeah.
driving it, it seems like this is a lot to put.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
And the other question I have is, and maybe you said it and I missed it, I apologize. The bus only or transit lane on the right, which looks like lanes I've seen in downtown LA and other places. What's the point of it?
It's basically like a queue jump for the bus. Like it's not waiting in traffic with the other vehicles. It's basically has its own prioritized lane.
But if it's coming up Fremont though, and it gets to Huntington, it stops and then the bus goes either right or left.
So right now,
you're not going to have it on the north of Fremont.
No, you'd have it. It would be for the, I think it's either the 178 or the 260. It goes eastbound, I'm sorry, westbound Huntington, and then southbound Fremont.
The 260 doesn't, it goes
I think it's
down on Atlantic.
It's the, there's the 178, the 260, and the, what's the third one?
The 250. It's something.
This bus is traveling northbound. Am I looking at this correctly or am I not?
No, this would be southbound. This bus is traveling southbound.
I mean, the bus only lane would be probably my
yeah. Sorry, yeah.
The bus only lane would be my lowest priority on this, just based on the frequency of metro services. I wish I could ride the bus to work, but there's not that many.
And then you get to Alhambra Road and it's gone, right?
Right.
I don't know. Maybe it's an interesting idea. I don't know if has a practical benefit here.
Yeah, I don't think there's enough viability for enough buses on the route to give it its own designated lane.
Yeah, I'd say restore the two-way turn lane. Okay.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. This is the.
Yeah, it does look like there's a lot of elements compared to how I see the street driving it.
I have a question.
Yeah, this is the 258. Sorry, this is the 258 line that comes down Fair Oaks, westbound Huntington, and then south on Fremont.
And I think it's like every 40 minutes or something like that. It's not that frequent.
Commissioner Abelson.
Sorry, John, I had one quick one. The two-way cycle track, would that continue? That would connect north of Huntington, right? There's that plan for a two-way cycle track on Fremont, north of Huntington.
Yeah, you kind of see it running through the entire thing. If you follow all of these as they're drafted, yeah.
Okay. Again, it would end at Alhambra Road because now you're in the city of Alhambra and they don't have so. Okay.
Right.
Right. Thank you. Sorry.
Question, John?
Yeah. I guess I heard the answer to one of my questions. Is the headway is about 40 minutes for an exclusive bus lane. Generally, with an exclusive lane, you want it to be used enough so that people recognize why it's there, but not too much, because otherwise it'll be congested. Once every 40 minutes doesn't sound like it would command that respect from other road users. But also there's one going southbound, but not one going northbound, which seems a little imbalanced. With regard to the cycle track, that would mean then that drivers who are parking to go to either a business or in most cases a residence would park far from the curb and get out of their cars and then have to mix it with the bicyclists and the pedestrians. Is that correct?
So you're talking about like how the cyclists would exit the cycle track?
No, I'm talking about persons parking in the car and then getting out or coming to their car. They would have to mix it with the bicyclists.
Yeah,
right?
if they're going that direction, they have to cross the cycle track.
Okay,
yeah,
with
yeah.
no curb line, with not parking at the curb. They're parking at a painted stripe, right?
Yeah, I mean, there could be a small curb, very, small sort of like curb stop, I guess, kind of like along the
Or
curb.
maybe a short
Yeah, very short.
sidewalk. or
Yeah,
something.
exactly. Yeah.
But I want to echo what I heard from the others, that there are homes along here and driveways. And I'm sure they would appreciate having positive protection to go in and out of their driveways by having a two-way left turn lane. But as a practical matter, even if you said only at the intersections, by the time you transition into the intersection and out, you're almost back at the next intersection. So I don't think that would really be feasible just to put them at intersections, because you're going to be in a constant state of transition. The final comment is that these mid-block renderings of the cycle track always look nice, but keep in mind at the intersections is where you have the conflicts with right turns. Sometimes drivers won't be expecting the opposing bicyclists coming toward them, because bicyclists are usually going in their direction, but also you can't really look over your shoulder effectively to see them coming parallel to you in your direction, but behind you. So then there has to be special signal phasing at all the signals to make sure that each moves separately in time. Thank you.
I just had the concern that, again, where this is located, because to John's point, there are a lot of homes, like if you look at the block, the 2 or 3 blocks south of Huntington, you've got to your left, as you would be proceeding south, the grocery outlet, and as you continue, there are homes all along there. There's a couple of businesses, they're small. There's the veterinarian, antique store, there's a couple places, but where would, if I'm parking and my home is over here and I'm parking out here, then I have groceries, then I'm trying to park and get to my house. I've got to cross the 2 bike lanes and the sidewalk to get to, and then where's my driveway? Intercepting.
Sure. Most of those homes have driveways, and there is a sidewalk, north-south sidewalk, and a parkway there. So their concept is really just basically expanding that sidewalk becomes a two-way cycle track with a sidewalk. So
Right.
it is longer distance, but that's what they saw as the opportunity, because you do have, there's going to be quite a bit of quite broken up because there are so many driveways, but there is that basically front parkway area that they would utilize.
Just a quick follow-on. I think there's a school isn't there a school south of Huntington, west side of Fremont, that you'd want to provide for access as well? It's just another point for the two-way turn, that's all. And I was going to ask about how these two-way cycle tracks are going to be controlled at intersections, but John covered it. Where I've seen those special signals dedicated to the cyclists. Is that what's contemplated?
Yeah, well, so a couple things. So the Almansor Early Education Center right there. So the one opportunity, and they made the comment about this, would be that you could have a left turn pocket at Huntington Lane that would allow you to access the school. And then I think the idea behind the cycle track through the intersections is that if you remove the right turn lane, then you have, you still have people making a right turn, but you have those people making a right turn, and basically, like Commissioner Fisher had said, they're waiting and they're looking to see if people are using the pedestrian walkway and the cycle track. So you could do a leading pedestrian interval and the equivalent of that for, say, like a cyclist with a detection system, but you wouldn't phase the signal to prevent a right turn because there is no right only turn. It's just,
Oh,
yeah,
understood.
through green.
Okay.
Exactly. So
It's just, it would be an adjustment for drivers.
absolutely a major adjustment to, how to cross both a crosswalk and a cycle track when you're making it right.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, continue.
I echo Eric's, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, we're at the end of Fremont, which is Alhambra Road. Pretty similar to Columbia Street in terms of um, limiting the span. You do see in this drawing, though, you do see that bus-only transit lane that you saw in their last picture, because it's all consistent with their approach. It's not going to be, you're not going to see a varied cross-section between the ideas. As many of you know, Alhambra owns most of the intersection, including the sidewalk. So this would take some major coordination with Alhambra. But one of the emphases of this design is that where Alhambra northbound is a two-lane road that merges starting in Alhambra, and the merge finishes in South Pasadena, Tool Design removed that merge. So that would definitely be something that had to be worked out with Alhambra, that there is no more merge in South Pasadena. Hasn't been discussed with Alhambra. Really need to make the stop here first to talk about it. Alhambra could either maintain their merge, and you really have that happening a little farther south. They could turn that into a right turn lane to go down Alhambra Road eastbound. But that's one of the major components here. Again, deterring large vehicle cut through and deterring the merge sort of weaving racing that would happen in South Pasadena. Not that it wouldn't happen in Alhambra, but it just wouldn't happen at that location because people aren't trying to head each other off to get to the intersection. And then the last part of this is Tool's idea to actually remove the truck route from Fremont Avenue. So right now the truck route goes from Fremont to Huntington. The idea would be that the truck route would be with Alhambra and Los Angeles, discussion with Alhambra and possibly Los Angeles. The truck route would go down Huntington to Main Street instead of going up Fremont Avenue through South Pasadena. So that's kind of part of this design. Sure, it's kind of hard to picture because it's zigzagged a little bit, but instead of a truck heading, westbound on Huntington and going southbound on Fremont, they would go on westbound on Huntington, continue past Fremont, which turns Huntington starts to start southbound, and then they would take a left heading sort of like southeast on Main Street, and then Main Street heads east and south.
It's like a hook there.
Yeah.
Say that again.
Yeah, do you want to, we have the map up here for this exact reason. Yeah, Philip, if you kind of just pull it up a little bit, and drag it north a little bit so we can see, actually the other direction, so we can kind of.
Zoom it down to Alhambra, zoom it out. Yeah.
Right there, yeah. So you can see at the very bottom of Philip's screen there, where Fremont connects from Huntington to Main Street. You have Fremont, Huntington, around where our webinar window is. And then at the bottom where the Zoom bar is, you have Fremont and Main. So the truck route would go from Huntington down to Main Street right there, and then onto Huntington, onto Main.
And that's both directions are contemplating that. They'd use the same path.
That's the idea. Yeah, that's what Tool proposed in terms of this, and in terms of removing the accommodation to remove large vehicles from that section of Fremont Avenue.
Does that have to be done by legislation? Or do you do a petition? How would we do that?
It's a good question. We've tried to explore this. I mean, at the moment, it's basically a municipal code update on South Pasadena's end, and probably a collaborative discussion with the other cities. That's helpful. Yeah, thank you. Sure, and each city sort of designates its truck route, so we'd have to find out if there is a regulatory impediment to how that would work. Yeah. Would also support it also. Yeah, and that makes sense.
So now, speaking of Alhambra being friendly, do you think they would be open to dropping a, so you mentioned when you're heading north from Alhambra to South Pasadena, right now there are 2 lanes in each direction. And then you get to Alhambra Road and you have that 50-foot merge, right? Where you race and you try to get in front of the queue. And only the bold kind of take that right lane who you got a good, get up and go and you can scoot in front of everyone. Do you think they would be open to dropping that to 1 lane in each direction and doing the lane drop at Main Street? And I say that too because I head that way home from work, and there's always someone turning left onto Grand Avenue there, a left onto Burt Street. And they end up blocking the through lane, that number 1 lane. So you kind of go in the right lane and people go in the left lane. So, if their argument is they're concerned about traffic impact and traffic queuing, they're already not getting the efficient capacity out of the street because people are blocking that number 1 lane. Do you think they would be open to doing that lane drop at Main Street?
I think they'd be open to the conversation about what we were looking to do. And, we've already talked about interfacing on a couple different intersections, including Marengo. And I think Fletcher was another one, or not Fletcher. Maybe it was Fletcher. I'm trying to remember which one the other one was. But no, I think they'd be open to the conversation. So it's really just
okay.
What your feedback is, and we think that this is a good idea as a priority to address the city gateways, as brought up a couple of times tonight.
And to the point that Commissioner Dunlap is making too, kind of on my list of overalls as going through the tool report was with all the congestion that potentially, and that Commissioner Fisher is pointing out that we could have with losing the right-hand turn lanes, left-hand turn lanes, et cetera, what might be the impediment to emergency response? Because as I look through, the streets that they earmark that we need for emergency response clearance and access, if we look at some of these others, a la Fremont, because we're so close to the fire station.
Sure.
We need to take those, we need the fire department and the fire chief to take a look and make sure there's a comfort level, because if everyone's backed up and they can't get around and we've narrowed the streets, then we have diminished our response times.
Sure, and the fire department was part of this conversation, and really was about making sure that there was that arterial framework for the department. They don't typically use Fremont, and so it's really just about making sure that they've got access, as we look at other streets in the city.
We just have to make careful because you've got, Fremont, you've got the schools, you've got the women's club, you've got a lot of people that gather and have a lot of people where, the churches where you can have, medical incidents, accidents, etc. We just need to make sure whatever we do, at some point, we make sure that the fire department team is looking and are considered as they review. Because when you looked at the access streets that were listed here for fire access or emergency response access, I think we just need to make sure we keep that in mind.
Absolutely.
There are 2 comments?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, Ted.
Oh, no, go ahead, please. Yeah.
And I was actually going to ask Commissioner Dunlap, then the northbound lane drop that you suggested, what do you think about that, suggesting to Alhambra that existing number 1 lane northbound be converted into a 2-way turn lane to address your...
Yeah, I think that's what I'm saying. I think we're on the same page. I think
okay,
like having a 2-way left turn lane and then 1 lane in each direction south of Alhambra Road until you get to Main Street.
Yes.
And doing the lane drop at Main Street.
Right.
And
okay. And I 100% agree with dropping the lane south of Alhambra Road. I think that's a great idea, and maybe the time has come. We can get agreement on that. And it's very much the same condition as southbound Orange Grove at Columbia, right? It's the same idea where we have that very concerning pinch from 2 lanes to 1 on Orange Grove south of Columbia, which is one of the reasons why we suggested restoration of the 2nd lane, because it is so dangerous. Sort of the same approach, right? I think it's that very quick pinch that creates a problem. So hopefully Alhambra would go for it, but obviously if they don't, is there a plan B? Are we stuck with the existing condition if they don't agree?
It really just depends on how our designer approaches it. Maybe they feel that the merge isn't necessary in South Pasadena, that there's sufficient merge length for the speed and for the street dynamics in Alhambra. That's a possibility. So it is configured the way it is right now because of the way the dimension of the street is set up. There's room for 2 lanes in South Pasadena. It's just not configured that way. So it could be that the design works even without the changes in Alhambra.
Okay. Just one last question. This crosswalk, is that raised on the north leg?
Yes. This is raised, so you can see the little curb pop-ups on the very corners, but that the crosswalk is at the same level as the sidewalk.
And that was that's the same design as what's proposed for Columbia?
Yeah, with the exception of in this one, you have a bus lane, so you have more space.
And I think you have our thoughts on the bus lane.
Yeah.
Sure. I'm curious about, understanding that the bus lane might not be necessary because the bus volume. Do you have the similar thoughts on terms of just only 2 lanes at the gateway versus like at Columbia where we were talking about the complication with not having a right turn lane or a left turn lane?
It seems like there should be a left turn pocket there. I don't know what the volume is. Eric
Sure.
probably knows much better.
Yeah, at Alhambra Road.
The volume, pretty, yeah, I mean, pretty high.
Should having a left-hand turn pocket be valuable?
The southbound one.
Yeah, I don't know about the southbound. Yeah. Yeah.
I think it would benefit South Pasadena to have a 2-way left turn lane becoming a left turn pocket at the intersection, because homes front on our portion of Fremont between Alhambra Road and whatever is next, Birch or something. Whereas in Alhambra, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, somebody, but I think their homes front on intersecting streets and not on Fremont. So I think it's not a pressing priority for them to have 2-way left turn lanes. But yeah, I think we should propose a 2-way left turn lane, 1 lane each way. That lane drop is not standard. And you either got to be a very bold driver or, or you're in an accident. But the raised crosswalk, again, it functions like a speed hump. You don't generally put speed humps on your busy collector streets unless you've got a compelling reason to do that. I just wonder what the fire department's reaction is regarding a big speed hump at an intersection. And plus, I think it's a surprise. The practice throughout the nation is to put speed humps in advance of intersections, generally 400, 500 feet plus or minus, to slow you down before you get to the most critical point, not to try to slow you down after you've already entered the intersection. I just don't see the utility of intersection speed humps or raised intersections or raised crosswalks at intersections.
There might be an opportunity to take the concept of this as being viewed as that also, other than being a traffic slowing suggestion, maybe to do, again, if you're looking this for some sort of gateway, that we could do some artistic work on the street itself, painting, we've seen the Route 66 signs around, something if you're looking for that gateway experience. But again, to the point where you're going to go in and you might, again, have this, quick stop in the middle of the intersection as you're going in. And again, as you're saying, the most dangerous point because of cross traffic, et cetera. I'm not sure if that's the best solution.
And I think you're already bringing the curbs out at those two north leg corners, right? The curbs are being pulled into the intersection. So that's sort of you're creating a gateway there, right? Because you're narrowing, right, the entrance into the community and defining it as something different than the street to the south already, I think. So that may serve that purpose in a better way.
That's helpful. So it may make sense to pause here. I have one more thing I want to share, but we can continue this at our next meeting if that's makes sense for everybody. Otherwise, we probably have at least another hour to go through Huntington Drive.
I think you're being kind. Yeah,
I said at least.
I guess here's the question. From a timing standpoint, would deferring and putting off the Huntington discussion for the November meeting, would that hold up anything?
So,
and it is a late hour, so I'm
sure. So our November meeting is November 19th. The November 6th and November 20th council meetings are fairly full with, other things that were, as far as just the citywide, but also public works items. So it's unlikely that we're bringing anything to council in November. It would put us on a pretty tight turnaround for December. So the Huntington Drive evaluation is a lot different than Fremont. So, it doesn't mean that we could largely still move forward and maybe be ready to go right after our November meeting. It might be our target then. If, there's probably not a whole lot of, you're going to have some comments on Huntington, but it probably won't change our approach too much as it would on Fremont.
Well, one of the things I might suggest, if we do move forward to deferring and putting the discussion on the Huntington Drive concepts to the November meeting, I think it's it should be imperative that we make it very clear on the agendas for the public what that focus is, because I think a lot of people tonight they spoke to the overall tool concept, and yet we got it narrowed down to a much more finite project scope.
Sure, and that was how we agendized it too, was the Fremont Huntington project. So I understand we can certainly make that clear on the agenda, posting that this is going to focus on the Huntington concept.
And that way the public will know and will get, participation and clear understanding of what we're looking at and kind of what we're discussing, what our budget, as we look at budget considerations, et cetera, in the overall. But I will ask the commissioners what they'd like to do. Would you like to defer?
I would like to, I don't know, I guess that'd be a move to continue the item, right? Is that what it is?
No, I can stay. It's just, what do you?
No, I move to continue it to.
Move to continue, yes.
To the next meeting.
Sure, before we do, I want to share one more thing. Philip, can you jump to slide 34? So,
Ted, to your point though,
yeah.
Is there anything that we should be concerned about risking any funding requests or demonstrative information that you need that has a timeline for the end of the year or anything, just so that we don't want to defer and then say, oh my gosh, the fact that you guys didn't look at this, we missed this submission in design concepts for X.
So there's not a funding issue. There is, it's a few more weeks before we would finish the RFP process. But then again, the RFP process limiting factor is not you, it's the staff that we have to actually execute it. So it could be that, we have enough information to work on Fremont now. And we have a large part of the RFP done. We'd incorporate all your input from tonight and basically have our input on Huntington finished and then add in Fremont, your Huntington. So I don't think it's really going to impact us more than by a couple weeks because it's not like we're releasing this thing tomorrow. So we could do it. And I don't think we have any other priorities that we need to get done as far as MTech goes in November. So we could do it that way.
Commissioner Fisher?
I'd just like to ask
Sure.
a question before we make a decision on what we're going to do now versus the next meeting. They had recommendations on other streets like Meridian, Orange Grove, Columbia, and Mission. Are we going to consider any of those recommendations?
We could talk about them. They had about, 2 pages worth of narrative discussion on those streets. They didn't really provide concepts like they did for Fremont, Huntington, and Fair Oaks. So we can report on what their assessment of those were, but it won't be as intense.
Would they be
intense as
eligible
this.
for this funding though?
No, they're not eligible for this funding.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just my opinion.
Sure.
I got a lot to say about them, but there's no reason to do so.
Yeah, I mean, there is a nexus for other projects, but it's not for Fremont Huntington.
So if we don't discuss them, then that means we are not recommending them. There's just no discussion, no recommendation.
Yeah, there's nothing really to do with those. The only one that actually has any funding is really Mission Street as part of the Slow Streets program. Orange Grove is part of our MSP, our Measure M, MSP money. And then we have some thoughts on Marengo as far as slurry maintenance improvements go.
Right, but they have other tracks they're on.
Yeah, they're on other tracks.
Whatever this report says wouldn't necessarily affect those projects and their concepts.
They could, but they're not part of any recommendation we're looking for you for right now. Yeah.
Okay. As for myself, I could stay a little bit longer if there were a good breaking point to discuss part of Huntington, but not the full part of it. So I'll do whatever the chair would like to do.
Tool's recommendations on Huntington are a lot like their Fremont recommendation, where you're going to see a consistent pattern across the whole corridor. And then we focus on, Marengo, Pine, Court, and Garfield and Maple, basically. So it's kind of similar, but a few less stops than we had on Fremont, but could certainly take, an hour plus to go through.
But Garfield, Pine, and whatever the other one is, are not part of this funding.
They are, yeah.
They are?
So they are. So it covers all of Fremont and all of Huntington.
But then I think we'll probably want to have a larger discussion too about the overall process, right? And general prioritization of this. And,
yeah.
Looking at this and where we think we should go first. And
absolutely. And like I said, we could probably make some more ground
process.
as far as what we outlined for that.
Yeah. I would think, and I think one of the key areas that is going to be impacted in this, a lot of suggestions, I know what you're presenting, was the Fair Oaks and Huntington intersection. Because there were a lot of discussion and tools proposal regarding how to handle that with a number of ways of completely changing and access across the street. I mean,
yeah, there's some time to be spent there to talk about what elements are on a Yep, of course. So I think it makes sense. I don't think you're going to slow us down. We may lose a week or two, but that's generous given the really lack of staff resources we have. I mean,
I think you have a lot on your plate as is, right?
Oh, yes.
With the
Yeah,
pavement
exactly.
work.
Yes.
So if I would get concurrence.
Can I ask one? I want to show one more thing before we go, because this is a time sensitive issue. So tonight I will be applying for additional MAT funding. It's due tomorrow. So the $6 million that we have for the Cycle 1 MAT, the city was actually eligible to apply up to $8 million under that funding. So in connecting with the folks at Metro that handle that specific funding source, very unique funding source, they're willing to take an application to try to move our 6 million up to the maximum number of 8, probably not total, but somewhere in between there. However, it has to be new project elements that were not considered in the original scope. So I shared the scopes earlier in the meeting. They were a bit generic. However, we've spent some time really evaluating active transportation safety priorities that Tool recommended that we can feel like are justified as not part of the original scope. And that's the 3 intersections you see here. Now, again, this is a funding agreement, so we're applying for a general amount of funding for improvements here. It's not like we submit these concept drawings and say we want to build this. We say things like, we want to consider implementation of curb extensions, high visibility crosswalks, pedestrian infrastructure, bike facilities. But our thought was these intersections were not really scoped to specifically in the original funding request. So if we wanted to make that application, my plan was to actually submit on Buena Vista, because we do have some improvements that we see there. Mission Street, given that we know we're going to have improvements even at the minimum from the road diet and the Slow Streets program. And we haven't talked about it yet, but we already have recommendations at Marengo and Huntington from our Marengo evaluation we talked about a month or 2 ago. So I'm planning on submitting on these to see if we are eligible for that remainder funding. It's due tomorrow, so it's perfect timing.
So you would be locked into doing something at these 3 intersections, but not necessarily what we see here.
It would be, we would justify, so you can't go to Metro and say I need more money because I need more money, cost overruns or, I didn't plan very well. Right. You will have to add benefit to the project. So I would emphasize that we would add benefit to the project at these 3 intersections and give the list of things that we would be looking to do. It could change in the design process. Really what Metro is looking for is how well vetted the concepts are. And we don't have a more vetted process than what we've gone through over the last year here. So really that's the value in what we're going to be submitting, is that the public outreach process has been very well done. And this is some of the elements that came out of this. We want to add basically infrastructure, active transportation infrastructure at these 3 intersections.
Okay, so we're committed to that, we're committed to that high level idea, but not these specific devices that
we're exactly. That's the case for the entire funding agreement. Yeah.
That was going to kind of be my question. We do want to be locked in, but the other was that Commissioner Fisher made the suggestion of here on Buena Vista also looking at a signal option. So whether that, and say we're looking at improving this, it's on a curve, we have speed, it accelerates, etc. And we're looking at doing this, and we're looking at.
So we basically describe that as like a pedestrian crossing device if feasible, basically is how we describe that. Yeah.
Why 3 intersections? Is that for flexibility? $2 million sounds like a lot, not a lot. Each one of these would probably be $1 million by itself. And so are you committed to doing something at all 3 now for $2 million? And is that going to be enough money?
Sure. I mean, to answer your question, that was sort of the calculation as to like, how do you, what in the scope is somewhat new. These 3 are new, and we already know even besides this process, we know we can make improvements to these intersections for pedestrians.
Okay.
So that's why we pick 3. We might not necessarily do everything at those intersections, but we could do something at each of those intersections.
Okay.
Yeah.
To fulfill the requirements of the grant.
Yeah.
Ted, I was hoping to hear in response to Commissioners Hughes and Abelson that you could substitute other things. I'm not sure that I heard you say that, because you said, oh, we'll have bulb outs and curb extensions and the like. I would like to be more generic than that, to leave it open to improvements that will benefit pedestrian safety, so that we could substitute signal control there, or rest in red over here, or whatever.
I think we could. We probably just have to have some examples. So, Philip, can you jump to slide 4? So this is what is in our current funding agreement that got approved. So, looking to somewhat mirror this, but because the funding agreement is a bit vague in terms of like, you know, it's hard, I have to be, because we're making this request, we have to make a compelling argument that we need more money to do something more than what we're doing on this page. So, put on your nuance hats and think about like how you would approach a funder to say like, I want to do something. I have to be somewhat specific, but also I want to be a little bit broad. So that's why I think the approach of talking about specific intersections and sort of giving examples of some of the things that could be implemented, and really
include,
leaning
like,
heavily on
may
the
include, but
yeah,
not limited
exactly,
to.
and leaning heavily on the outreach process that's already been conducted to convince that these intersections need it and it's wanted. So I would, if um, per your point, I think if you want to give some more examples, like you had mentioned the down here. Sorry, I'm losing track of my thoughts.
So is it the green swallows? That would be a new installation.
Well, we could mention that the
potentially raised intersections.
Well, you have
the rest in red concept. Yeah, exactly.
You have pedestrian crossing features. I'm surprised we don't have new signal technology also on Fremont as we do on Huntington.
Well, that's true. But again, the other complementing funding source measure R has it all over. So this is really, they're going to want us to focus on, to get awarded this additional money, it's going to have to really focus on pedestrian improvements, which would be some sort of signal technology that's focused on pedestrian use.
Right, but you don't have that under Fremont.
Yeah, I don't know why this was written the way it was. It was before I got here. It's been hard to sort of understand
I just
the origin,
recommend
but
that language be used to justify rest in red, more pedestrian time, leading pedestrian interval, all those things that can be done from a signal perspective.
Yeah.
Which is really missing. Everything is, curb ramps and bulb outs and the like. And so we need more of that. So I'm hoping you can write it up in such a generic way that it would allow those to be considered as eligible.
Yeah, that's good direction.
And then on Huntington Marengo, we haven't discussed that yet. I'm just wondering, since you have to get it in tomorrow, could we substitute Fremont and Columbia?
We could, except for the fact that our scope is really limited at Fremont, Columbia to just the southern crossing, in theory. Everything else would be a separate project with Pasadena.
So because Fremont, Columbia is mostly in Pasadena, that couldn't be considered?
Yeah, just because the scope doesn't allow us to apply the funding to that intersection, which I know is a little frustrating. We're talking about it because we want the designer to address it, but we actually won't be able to pay the designer out of this funding for that part.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm fine with what you suggested. Something I don't see in here that I think is a priority now is shade, particularly around like bus stops. And so I know Fremont and Huntington there's not a lot of shade in that intersection. And so I wonder if any of this funding could be used to help fund some of the curb ramp upgrades to install trees, or maybe any of the tree work that's part of these projects.
Yeah, definitely. We probably wouldn't utilize that for this additional request, but especially when we get to Huntington, you'll see the emphasis that tool design put on increased canopy to a great extent. And so I think that's a really valid comment in terms of like especially a transit benefit.
But Ted, I just want to ask a question. I think this issue's been covered, and I'm sounds like we're gonna have some flex in what, and if it's awarded on what we can, it has to be these locations, but we'll have an array of devices that we can implement or not. We're not,
Yeah, and the reason I mentioned Marengo was simply because of the pedestrian concentration there. It's kind of like almost like any number of things could be
sure,
done there. Even the signal upgrade them itself is an issue because it's just so old.
Well, you're close to the school too.
Right. So that's why I thought that would be a good submitter to like sort of almost like I don't want to call it a flagship, but really a poignant recommendation for additional funding. And we've got a lot sort of backing it as far as evaluation goes.
sure. No,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
fine with it. The question sort of relates to this comment about the signals so Fremont, Columbia. And you mentioned how the funding that we've been talking about, we can't do anything more essentially than these concepts that came up. And I know part of our discussion was adjusting the signals, right? Like, for example, removing the green arrow or things like that. Are those not things that can be done through this project?
They can be. We just have to be careful about how we fund those things.
Okay.
So, for a good example is removing the green arrow at Fremont. If there is one of the reasons to remove that is to reduce,
Discourage traffic flow.
Sure, right.
Southbound.
So that kind of like is not what Measure R is about. But if we're doing that in such a way that we're making other pedestrian improvements so that the right turn of folks through that intersection is not so as dangerous for people crossing the south leg, that's how we tie it to the active transportation funding.
It's the art of packaging and selling and marketing.
Right, which is actually going to be one of the biggest challenges in delivering this project is scoping all of the pieces of it appropriately for the designer so that the design and construction is funded the right way. When I first got to the city, I tried hard to marry these two funding sources together so that it'd be a lot easier to deliver the project. But they exist separately. They're two separate projects that we're really just trying to deliver together. In fact, we even considered hiring two separate designers to execute these two separate projects, but I just don't think that's going to be a good outcome for everybody. So we are taking the burden on of trying to like really keep it organized.
And just one last overall question. Out of the 16, 17, or maybe even 19 million that we have for these two streets, and maybe there's a standard formula. What's your sense of how much of these funds can be used for the actual construction versus design, drawing?
It's already worked out. So like basically for Measure R, we're supposed to get through environmental and design with that first initial 1.1 million. The remainder 9 or so is supposed to be used for construction. And then as far as Fremont Hinding goes, I think it's like 900,000 that's design, and then the remainder is supposed to be construction.
It's a pretty good ratio.
Yeah, I mean it's typically like 10 to 20%.
Great, thank you.
Just one final question. Can any of this funding be used for pavement rehabilitation?
It's a very good question. I believe it can, under the delivery of improved markings. We have to still determine how to parse that out among the two funding sources. And because that was our strategy, if you remember, was to not dip into the local street repair money for these projects. So it does take a decent chunk out of it. We're talking probably a good $5 million for the both. That could be a low number depending on the condition of the different streets. And Huntington is certainly an interesting animal because it's got an asphalt layer above a concrete layer. So yeah, that is definitely going to be involved. The design process absolutely will address pavement rehabilitation. The question is how far can we get in construction with everything we want to accomplish and pavement rehabilitation? we might have to invest additional funding from the street replacement fund for it. Not let alone, and this is, don't even think about this because it's not going to be an impact. Like we have to deal with some water line reconstruction, but that will be funded completely out of the water enterprise fund. Nothing, we won't touch transportation funds for that. But that's the idea, is that we take care of this as a one dig project.
And the consultant didn't touch that subject.
No, but I touch it at the end of our presentation. So yeah, yeah.
That I would think with what's being proposed for Huntington, which we're not discussing tonight, that we're disturbing a lot of asphalt, correct?
Well, you know, and that kind of goes into our recommendation of, you know, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but about how we're going to address that, because that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Ted, do you want to, are we stopping here then?
Yeah, that works. And we'll continue working. Maybe we'll even have some more materials for you next week in addition to the presentation, or sorry, next month. And we'll go from there. So thank you so much.
And then Ted, can you share this package with?
Yeah, we'll post the presentation on online for
Okay.
tonight, and you can feel free to jump ahead and look at the other stuff if you want, and maybe we'll modify it for November, but we'll post what we have online.
It'll be a good tutorial as we start and look at the next phase for Huntington.
Yeah, we'll just release it as an additional document for tonight's meeting. And
And
again, we would have normally given this stuff ahead of time, but we're literally getting it done. This, you know,
And just make it really clear that we're really just going to focus on Huntington Drive on the agenda item.
Yeah, no problem, of course.
I think, are there any other questions for Ted? And then we move to our next item, which is the approval of the regular minutes. I know Commissioner Fisher had some changes that he had submitted, but I want to see if anyone else had changes, comments, adjustments, additions.
I had one. I think there was a voting item at the end. Maybe it was to approve the last minutes. It shows that I voted for it, but I think I had left by then.
I think that is true. Yeah.
Yes.
So we just need to adjust that. Philip. In the motion on page 3.
Is it item 5?
Yeah. The item for commission action and motion, which was the approval of the amended minutes, it listed that Commissioner Dunlap was a aye in favor, but he had left, I believe, is what he's commenting.
Okay.
Just strike my name out.
Gotcha. Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And Commissioner Fisher, were there changes other than the ones you submitted?
No.
So it's funny. I had no comments this time around, but now that we're talking about item 5, I think I was present at this meeting, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So I think
my name
you
doesn't
need to
appear
be
anywhere,
there,
and
right.
I think I voted in favor because we had a whole conversation whether I should abstain or not.
Right.
The mayor and I said, no way, I didn't have to. So I agreed.
To put you on there.
But that's not otherwise.
I just had a couple. Under the Marengo, Walter Otitsu commented about funding, and I think it means he wanted sources for active transportation programs. And then just, and then on the review of north-south corridor, like third line, these are 30% plans. That just doesn't seem to read right. These are 30% plans continued. Gerber.
What do you mean?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. It's
30% plans. Usually when you do plans, they're broken down into 30%, 60%, 90% final
we should
plans,
probably
right?
define it a little better.
Right.
That the proposed plans
30%.
represent 30%.
It's like a first draft of plan.
These are
30% unfinished plan. I don't.
these are the first step in planning. What, it just seemed very strange when you read it. If someone who doesn't know
Mm-hmm.
wasn't there and they're
It's
looking
like,
at that.
would you say 30% is like a first draft of plans?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The 30% plans represent a first draft or the first steps. That's, I'm just.
Yeah, in a construction design, yeah.
And then under the time for the 9:57, the PMs need punctuation. And then, and I don't think they finished the line under City Council Liaison Communications where it says, will be located at the community building at the South Pasadena. I think we're missing copy there. I think it was
Public library?
I think it was the library or the community center. I can't remember which one. But I think we're missing something there. And under my comments, acknowledge the city treasurer, Ellen Deagle, and who passed away. And that's why she was mentioned. And that's all that I had. Anyone else have anything else?
What were John's?
John, you had submitted.
It was regarding the South Pasadena walk sign. And just few words were changed to make grammatically correct.
Oh,
but I don't have it.
okay.
With that, I'll entertain a motion for approval of the amended minutes. Is there a second? All those in favor?
Aye.
That's 4 ayes, okay. And that brings us now to, I believe, City Council liaison comments. Madam Mayor, thank you for being so patient tonight. Especially because I know you said you were tired.
I have no comments. Thank you.
To commissioner comments. Let's start with Commissioner Abelson.
Due to the late hour, I'll reserve my comments for next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I just want to thank Ted and Philip very much for tonight's presentation. It was very helpful, very informative, and I'm sure took an incredible amount of time. So thank you very much.
Okay. Commissioner Fisher.
Oh, I had no real comments. I just wanted to apologize for causing us to start late, that I could get these copies of bulb outs. I'm not sure if it will come up at the next meeting, but I'd ask you to bring these just in case. And also I wanted to thank the Public Works Director for his patience. I know some of the report may have been difficult to present or defend, and thank you for listening to all of our comments and critiques.
Commissioner Dunlap.
Nothing aside from thank you to Director Gerber for the presentation tonight. And thanks also to the community members who came and spoke. I know it takes a lot to come out of here. Everyone has a lot going on. So when folks stop by and say hi and voice their opinions, is certainly welcomed.
I also want to say thank you to Director Gerber and also for Tool for listening to the community and for creating a philosophy and a vision. And I think interpreting a lot of what our community has been telling us for a great deal of time about walkability, safety, access, community. I do think we need to kind of get to the bottom of costs and what we can bring forth, and to thank those people that do come out and speak. And I hope that more people will come out to the November meeting as we look at the major thoroughfare Huntington Drive. And again, thank you to Philip as well. But I appreciate presenting everything, and hopefully we can be of service and offer concrete and important suggestions. And we really thank you. So on that note, I will adjourn the meeting at 9:54. Thank you, everyone.